Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into an era where serving as a queen involved donning layers of heavy fabric while quietly bearing the weight of intricate political maneuvers in which you frequently served as the pawn rather than the strategist. Welcome to the world of medieval royalty, where the crown weighs heavily on your head, your expressions are carefully practiced, and indeed, survival is far from guaranteed. So, before settling in, please take a second to like this video and subscribe if you truly appreciate the content I create. And hey, share where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. I enjoy discovering who's joining me on this exploration. Now, lower the lights, perhaps activate a fan for that gentle ambient noise, and let's gently embark on tonight's tale together. You're 13, perhaps 14, and you've just been informed that marriage awaits you. As a noble girl, possibly a princess or the daughter of a lesser king, you're on the verge of becoming a medieval queen. Sounds enchanting, doesn't it? Not at all. This isn't about romance. It's purely a matter of politics. Your prospective spouse is selected based on the benefits he can provide to your father, territory, soldiers, an agreement, or perhaps merely the resolution of a long-standing family vendetta that predates your birth. Your viewpoint isn't simply overlooked, it's entirely disregarded. Should you object vehemently, you could bring shame upon your family, and you understand the dire consequences of that. Spoiler, they aren't favorable. You're sent away from your familiar surroundings, accompanied by a caravan of carts pulled by oxen, chests filled with dowry items, and anxious attendants tasked with overseeing you until death, or potentially until your new household replaces them with informants. You might have encountered the king once before, or maybe not. It doesn't make a difference. You'll see him once more on the day of the wedding, beneath a haze of incense and the chants of monks, before an assembly of unfamiliar faces eager to observe if tears escape your eyes. And they likely will, since this man isn't a charming prince from legends. He's 35, weathered by battles, possibly still wed to another woman who's been conveniently confined to a nunnery. Or worse, he's a youth your own age, possessing equally limited authority, surrounded by scheming elderly aristocrats who manipulate both of you like puppets in a shadowy performance. Historically, such arrangements were commonplace. Eleanor of Aquitaine was wed to Louis VII of France at 15. She ascended to the throne of France almost instantly. Her responsibilities: appear elegant, remain compliant, and produce an heir for France precisely in that sequence. Not that she followed those directives, incidentally, but we'll discuss her famous defiance shortly. For now, your existence revolves around luxurious fabrics, precious gems, and overwhelming obligations. And the wedding. Let's not romanticize it. You proceed down the aisle in a dress heavier than your mount, adorned with golden threads and trimmed with squirrel pelts. It appears opulent until you consider that medieval cleaning practices were rather unreliable. You might seem luminous, but you carry the aroma of beeswax, faded lavender, and anxious perspiration. All eyes are upon you. Absolutely everyone. The bishop, your future relatives, the staff crowded against the rear walls, straining for a view of the event, following the vows and exchange of rings, perhaps a coronet if they're inclined to generosity. You're led to a chamber where, based on the intrusiveness of local traditions, your initial night with your husband could be observed. No, not figuratively. In certain royal circles, there existed a custom where aristocratic observers witnessed the newlyweds being prepared for bed, followed by an examination of the sheets the following day to confirm the union had been completed. Rest well. The most peculiar aspect is that your family probably prepared you for this very occasion. You grew up in quarters adjacent to the women's area, educated to read sufficiently for reciting psalms, instructed in embroidery and proper etiquette, yet no one prepared you for the terror of kneeling next to a man capable of condemning others to execution and addressing him as your cherished lord. You may not share his tongue. You likely have no knowledge of his governing style, and you're required to occupy his bed, grin as if it's a privilege, and promptly begin the process of bearing children. The disparity in authority is immense, but here's an unexpected turn. Queens weren't perpetually without influence. In reality, numerous ones exercised remarkable indirect power via persuasion, partnerships, and ecclesiastical connections. Yet at the outset, as an adolescent thrust into an alien court with unfamiliar cuisine, odd traditions, and potentially antagonistic nobility, you're more ornamental than authoritative. And nevertheless, there's an element of the surreal in it as well. You're presented with a crown, enveloped in garments valued more than an estate, and addressed as Her Grace by individuals who, mere days prior, were unaware of your existence. Your identity transforms. Your heraldic emblem is redesigned. Your background is integrated into your husband's domain. This isn't merely a union. It's a complete overhaul of your persona. You're no longer simply a daughter. You're an asset strategically positioned atop the chessboard of European lineages. Occasionally, fortune smiles upon you. Perhaps your husband proves benevolent. Perhaps the court holds you in esteem. Perhaps you master the language, forge bonds, and even establish a niche of your own. But don't settle in too comfortably. Your reproductive role is now a national concern. Your primary obligation is to deliver a male successor, ideally as soon as possible. All else is mere decoration. One obscure detail: in certain royal nuptials, the bride was physically transported to the bed in a ritual termed the bedding ceremony, accompanied by tunes, jests, and uncomfortable prodding from elderkin. The whole court regarded it as the climactic event of a grand meal. Picture that as an adolescent, academics continued to discuss whether queens functioned as mere tokens or active participants in this framework. Some maintain they were solely containers for heirs and diplomatic accords. Others contend that, notwithstanding limitations, they frequently possessed genuine authority, particularly if they survived their spouses or nurtured influential offspring. But this evening, you're simply a youthful queen perched on the side of an unfamiliar bed, gazing at unfamiliar hangings, striving to hold back tears. And believe it or not, the complexity only intensifies from this point. The following morning, sunlight filters through unfamiliar stained glass, projecting colorful patterns across a stone floor colder than your apprehension. You're awake much too early, your body sore from the rigid ceremonial bedding, and the court is already alive with murmured rumors and hurried steps. Why? Because today, your dowry becomes formalized. And truthfully, nobody in this fortress values you more than they value your worth. The dowry isn't merely a courteous acknowledgement for relieving your father of your care. It's a meticulously computed assortment of riches, estates, entitlements, and occasionally whole municipalities. You represent a geopolitical exchange adorned in pearls and velvet. It's conceivable that your dowry was negotiated for years prior to your reaching adolescence. And now, with the marriage fulfilled in the most uncomfortable manner, the settlements are due. Clerks in coarse garments bend over scrolls, quibbling over precisely how many livestock or estates correspond to your matrimonial bond. Some royal dowries were utterly extravagant. Margaret of Denmark, for example, included the entire Orkney and Shetland Islands in hers. Envision being so prized that vast portions of the North Sea accompanied your vows. Meanwhile, in France or England, the dowry might encompass jewels, spices, rolls of fabric, and thousands of gold pieces. A specific entry could list 12 dresses embroidered with peacock feathers. And this wasn't symbolic. It was significant. If the dowry was insufficient or postponed, it could ignite a conflict. Yes, a war sparked by absent embroidery floss. And here's the uneasy reality. Your worth is now embedded in this exchange. If your dowry was substantial and delivered promptly, congratulations, you're a cherished diplomatic resource. If your father skimped on payments or withdrew commitments, you're now the costliest letdown at court. No pressure, but it becomes more intricate. The dowry isn't unidirectional. There's also a dower, which is what your husband pledges to you in exchange. A sort of contingency fund should he perish gruesomely in combat. It typically encompasses lands or revenue-generating assets that you'll inherit upon outliving him. Naturally, whether you actually receive those properties depends on your husband's disposition, your standing, and how many plotting relatives covet those holdings for themselves. There's an obscure historical anecdote here that's somewhat amusing in a dark manner. Some dowries were itemized down to the quantity of underclothing provided. For instance, your father might have supplied a complete inventory of your trousseau, detailing how many linen chemises you brought and if they were edged with gold thread. Some of these lists have endured, and yes, they are oddly precise. It's akin to perusing a medieval clothing catalog on vellum. Once this transactional ritual concludes, you formally belong to your husband's establishment. Your allegiances transfer immediately, regardless of whether your emotions have followed suit. And here's where it turns profoundly uncomfortable. Occasionally, your father and husband harbor deep animosity toward each other, but that no longer signifies. You must maintain civility, remain impartial, and above all, generate heirs. That's the sole aspect of the arrangement that can't be inscribed on parchment, so everyone observes, anticipating signs of pregnancy soon. Oh, and don't anticipate seclusion. Courtiers delight in conjecture. There's even a phrase for the intense scrutiny queens encountered post-wedding: the queen's bloom. Everyone yearns to discover when you'll flourish into maternity. If you sneeze during the morning meal or decline a chalice of wine, murmurs swirl like gathering storms. Some queens feigned early pregnancies to gain time. Others concealed miscarriages to evade court disgrace. You might attempt to concentrate on something less daunting, like acclimating to your new quarters, but even that is laden with tension. Your accommodations are lavishly appointed gilded panels on the walls, intricately carved bedposts, carpets sourced from Byzantium. But you're never solitary in them. Your attendants slumber nearby. Servants enter and exit without announcement, and every utterance can and will be echoed. Nonetheless, you endeavor to assert control where possible. Perhaps you request your preferred psalter be positioned by your bedside. Maybe you order a tapestry illustrating your family's emblem to remind all, including yourself, of your origins. Small gestures of personal affirmation can prove effective, but you quickly learn not to exaggerate them. Displaying excessive pride is hazardous, particularly if you're a queen from abroad. People desire you to be stately, not rebellious. Here's an academic discussion that remains unresolved. Were dowries empowering or degrading? Some historians posit that since the dowry frequently included land entitlements and revenues, it afforded queens bargaining power within the royal family. Others retort that the entire mechanism diminished women to actual commodities. You might discern validity in both perspectives. After all, you possess estates and gems, but also roughly the same independence as an ornate table covering. And then, naturally, there's the uncomfortable possibility that you could be utilized once more. If this marriage collapses, say your husband perishes abruptly, or the alliance disintegrates, you might be dispatched and wed again, occasionally to someone even more aged or with diminished dentition. Your dowry could be renegotiated akin to a transaction for pre-owned merchandise. The only thing more precarious than a political marriage is a subsequent one. Hooray! But for the present, you grin, maintain upright posture at banquets, and feign that the sausages and sweetened almonds render everything ordinary. You grasp your goblet with refined fingers and chuckle courteously at humor you scarcely comprehend. Every motion is observed, every error critiqued, every instant chronicled, sometimes literally in palace logs or scribes' rolls. Because you're no longer an individual. You're an emblem, a pact, an ornate connection between two unstable realms. And as draining as that all is, it's merely the commencement. The first time you behold the castle that's now your residence, you anticipate grandeur, perhaps towering spires, lush landscapes, gleaming polished stone under the afternoon glow. Instead, you encounter something from a frigid vision. Chilly walls, overcast skies, atmosphere dense with moist moss and distrust. The fortress isn't designed for luxury. It's constructed to resist assaults. And now, you dwell here. Congratulations. The entry into court is pure spectacle. Don't be mistaken. The entire assembly emerges to welcome you, though smiles are restrained. Flags flutter, horns sound, and youngsters are scrubbed meticulously merely to stand in a soggy courtyard waving rosemary branches. You arrive rigid in the saddle, maintaining flawless posture. Your attire likely weighs 30 pounds, and beneath it, you're enduring saddle discomfort and biting wind that pierces your silk-lined sleeves like a blade. But you can't wince. Queens don't wince. At the fortress entrance, your husband or prospective husband, depending on the duration of the nuptial celebrations, greets you with formal motions, a peck on the cheek, a brief hand clasp. If he's audacious, he might raise your veil before the gathering, but you're already surveying the expressions behind him. That's your true worry. Who regards you with squinted eyes? Who grins excessively? Because the instant you cross that portal, you're not merely a visitor. You're an interloper in another's domain. The court is a buzz of motion. Men in adorned tunics offer stiff bows. Women in substantial head coverings share looks, and servants dart about like rodents in the background. You're presented with all the customary grandeur. Her Royal Grace, Queen of this and that, Lady of such and such. It requires a full 2 minutes merely to articulate your title, but each term reinforces to everyone precisely what value you commanded. That designation is now woven into your essence, like it or not. Indoors, the space carries the odor of smoldering tallow, damp rock, and whatever the cooks are simmering for the evening's meal, which might range from seasoned hare to eel pastry. The walls are covered with tapestries that appear cozy but offer little defense against drafts. Your quarters, referred to as the Queen's apartments, are isolated sufficiently to shield you from the common throng, but not so secluded that rumors can't seep through the planks. And here's the twist. You don't truly know anyone. Not genuinely. Perhaps your new mother-in-law, if she's alive and hasn't been dispatched to a convent. Maybe your attendants, if your father succeeded in sending a few you trust. But the majority of those surrounding you are unfamiliar, ambitious, chatty, power-seeking strangers. And you? You're a teenage queen lacking allies, experience, and knowledge of which utensil to employ for salted fish. A real-life illustration of this chilly reception. Anne of Bohemia. Upon her arrival in England to wed King Richard II, individuals openly ridiculed her dowry, deeming it valueless. She didn't speak English. She was plunged into an environment where her new subjects anticipated wonders and immediate allure. And she provided neither, at least initially. It required years for her to gain acceptance. And you will attempt as well. You'll offer polite smiles to baronesses who stare, pose cautious inquiries about regional saints, compliment wall hangings even if they're unattractive. Everything is an act. And the harshest part, the act never concludes. You're not permitted to brood or lash out or request to return home, not unless you wish to trigger a diplomatic crisis. Oh, and you swiftly realize that every movement you make is under scrutiny, not symbolically literally. There are observers in the walls, not sorcery, just idle, inquisitive servants who report to superior courtiers who subsequently relay details to the king's counselors and ultimately to the king himself. Did the queen consume her figs at breakfast? Did she converse too extensively with the Spanish diplomat? Did she don blue on a holy day? All documented, all debated in subdued voices over spiced ale. But let's focus on the servants for a moment, as this is where matters turn peculiar. Some are faithful, some resentful, and some simply present. One could be a rural girl who's never ventured beyond her hamlet before advancing to chambermaid. Another might be the illegitimate child of a noble lineage with no alternative path, and a few are outright operatives, some dispatched by your kin, some by adversaries, and some merely prying opportunists with keen hearing and enduring recollections. The obscure fact here, in certain medieval courts, queens were required to maintain their own diminutive household within the broader royal one. Envision it as a private society with its own finances, structure, and intrigue. You oversee your own maids, scribes, cooks, and confessor. It appears empowering until you recognize that any among them might betray you the instant it advantages someone further up the hierarchy. Meanwhile, your new subjects are observing too, and they hold views. If you're from a distant land, you're instantly suspected of attempting to taint the court with alien concepts, or worse, alien styles. They murmur that you usher in portents, that your accent implies your supplications are invalid, that your exotic habits signal concealed wrongdoing. Even if you're benevolent and liberal, gossip adheres to you like sodden fleece. This leads to a persistent academic discussion. Were foreign queens more susceptible or more potent due to their outsider position? Some assert they possessed fewer political supporters and were convenient scapegoats. Others contend that their distinctive heritage granted them unusual autonomy from domestic groups. In your situation, It simply feels like isolation amid a throng of people who all possess knowledge you lack. But still, you adapt. You commit names to memory. You discover which areas of the castle retain warmth longest at night. You begin consuming local fare, somewhat. You rehearse bows before a reflective surface until your knees throb. And gradually, very gradually, the court starts to perceive you not merely as the new queen, but as their queen. Not that this simplifies matters. In truth, it merely indicates that the genuine intrigues are about to commence. Night descends heavily in the stone passageways of your new abode. And while the day has been packed with greetings, veiled flattery, and avoiding stumbles over your own stitching, tonight is entirely different. Tonight concerns obligation, or depending on which palace rumor you heed, display. You're required to do more than occupy a bed. You're required to solidify the marriage in a manner that leaves no uncertainty, no legal evasions, and no postponements. Tonight, you're required to consummate your bond. And in some medieval courts, that requirement doesn't halt at the bedroom threshold. You've heard the murmurs, naturally. Some realms fully embrace the observed bedding ritual. A group accompanies you and your husband to the marital bed with humor, melodies, and clumsy benedictions. Imagine it as a medieval procession line, except it culminates with you being disrobed by your attendants while the rest stand by, feigning disinterest. In some locations, the bedding was attended, though mercifully not always directly viewed. Instead, the next day, linens were exhibited, or midwives and elder women might be summoned to inspect for specific indications of consummation. You recline in bed, heart racing, swathed in sheets that carry the scent of moist rosewater and generations of uncomfortable legacy. Your husband reclines beside you, possibly more anxious than you, though he'd prefer facing wild beasts than confessing it. Whether he's tender or distant or awkward or experienced, you're still an adolescent, and no preparation or counsel can ready you for the expectation of enacting intimacy with someone who was unfamiliar last week. This isn't a romantic getaway. It's a civic right, and while it's adorned with lace and flames, it's fundamentally about lineage and validity, not your sentiments. This is what queens were groomed for, even if unspoken. You may have devoted years to mastering courtly decorum, sacred texts, household management, but everything culminates here, ensuring the marriage is irrevocable and fruitful. It's a frighteningly narrow divide between revered queen and diplomatic disappointment. You awaken the next morning beneath that identical burden. You're a spouse now, a prospective parent, a governmental investment that must produce outcomes, and individuals begin regarding you differently. The same courtiers who offered polite nods yesterday now glance at your abdomen as you walk by, eyes darting downward as if your uterus might declare its plans over the morning meal. Your maids murmur more. The attendants behave more protectively. And your husband, well, he's likely off falconing or pursuing game because the task is accomplished, and his part, for the moment, is deemed complete. You might not even be the sole woman in his existence. Medieval monarchs weren't renowned for fidelity. Some maintained official paramours, others simply a cycling roster of preferred companions, many residing under the same roof. In some courts, the queen was expected to endure it. Overt envy isn't refined. You're supposed to be tranquil, ethereal, and transcendent, even if your heart is shattering or your temper is simmering. And yet, some queens maneuvered this turmoil with astonishing initiative. Consider Isabella of France, wed to England's Edward II, who notoriously favored a particular male companion. Isabella tolerated years of marginalization before ultimately spearheading a revolt against her husband. Yes, the Queen orchestrated a genuine overthrow. So, while the initial night might seem like the start of perpetual subjugation, that's not invariably how the narrative concludes. But in this instant, that seems distant. The court hasn't finished with you yet. After the marriage comes the public affirmation of your new status. You might be displayed through the avenues in a gilded coach, with petals scattered at your feet, crowds applauding as if you've already borne twins and rescued the realm from pestilence. It's all part of the facade. Queens aren't merely symbols. They're emblems of heavenly endorsement, your attractiveness, your composure, your fecundity. All viewed as indications that divinity favors the domain. No pressure. An obscure fact worth mentioning. In some customs, a special pastry or spiced loaf was offered the day following the wedding, and all would raise toasts to your prospective offspring. Occasionally, fertility emblems were incorporated into the dough, because what could be more delightful than slicing into a pastry and discovering a tiny golden infant token gazing back? But don't be deceived. Beneath all this splendor lies a stark reality. If you don't conceive swiftly, or worse, if you suffer a miscarriage, your favor will plummet. People will attribute it to your physique, your alien lineage, your transgressions, your insufficient devotion. Never mind that medieval remedies were essentially conjecture involving bloodletting. Never mind that males contribute equally to that process. You are the queen, and thus the reproductive apparatus. The strain is perpetual and overwhelming. There's a long-standing academic discussion about how much authority medieval queens possessed over their own conjugal arrangements. Some posit that queens could bargain bedroom interactions, particularly if they were astute politically or hailed from influential clans. Others contend queens were mostly powerless. Their agreement was irrelevant in legal and religious contexts. What we do know is that many queens discovered ingenious methods to manage what they could: timing, sway over domestic personnel, and eventually direction over their children's destinies. But at this phase, you're largely passive in the experience, so you do what is necessary. You refine your grin. You start maintaining a private diary, perhaps, or murmuring reflections to trusted maids, though trust is always conditional. You attend services, you participate in court, you dispatch correspondence to your mother if the scribes permit it. You commence planning for the future, not merely gestation, but endurance. And endurance, you're beginning to comprehend, entails more than mere existence. It means remaining valuable, appealing, dutiful, prolific, non-menacing, but also astute, tough, enduring. You're balancing on a slender cord entwined with golden strands, and every morning, as the bells chime across the gray courtyard and your image shimmers in a burnished copper reflector, you quietly inquire of yourself, how long can I sustain this? It begins with a subtle flutter, merely a hint of queasiness upon rising, a mild constriction in your chest, when the morning gruel unsettles your stomach. Your maid detects it before you, narrowing her gaze as she assists in loosening your gown slightly. The rumor circulates faster than anticipated. The queen is altering. Messengers exchange glances. The chef prepares milder dishes. A doctor's called without your request. No one utters the word outright. Not yet. But you already sense what they're anticipating. You're expectant, possibly. And just like that, you're no longer merely a spouse. You're the uterus of the kingdom. You've transitioned from decorative to indispensable. The queen's role, your role, is finally unfolding. And while superficially there's delight, presence, benedictions, and ritual invocations, beneath it all is the sound of seats being drawn nearer to the throne. Because once you're bearing an heir, your influence adjusts subtly, but sufficiently for individuals to commence calculating how long until a new monarch emerges, or if fortune favors you, a queen mother. Pregnancy during medieval times is horrifying. There are no scans, no supplements for expectant mothers, no true comprehension of pathogens or the actual appearance of a uterus. You're not so much tended to as surveilled, observed like a fragile artifact teetering on the brink of shattering. The royal healers probe and examine, assessing your pulse, gauging your abdomen with strings, uttering phrases in Latin, while your attendants prepare linen steeped in lavender and rosemary. Some herbs aid, some likely don't. Some, if misdosed, could even prove fatal. And yet you proceed through the routines, striving to seem composed. You participate in Mass each morning, nodding devoutly as the cleric discusses the Virgin Mary and the wonder of existence. That's the persona they desire from you. Sacred Mother, selected conduit, serene deity of impending parenthood. But inwardly, you're a 17-year-old girl enduring lower back discomfort, persistent head pain, and absolute lack of command over your body's transformations. Every movement from within your abdomen is both exhilarating and alarming. If it's a boy, you've triumphed. If it's a girl, you smile graciously and pretend no one is covertly disheartened. And if the infant is born lifeless or you succumb during delivery, well, then you'll be commemorated in songs as a sorrowful protagonist, which offers scant solace, truthfully. By your 7th month, the palace starts to hush. Your husband becomes more vigilant. Guests are vetted. Loud disturbances are prohibited near your rooms. The court holds its shared breath. Midwives are summoned from distant regions, some conventional, some instructed by monks, all discreetly anxious beneath their serene expressions. Because childbirth in the Middle Ages is a wager with loaded odds. Even queens perish screaming in the birthing bed. Probably especially queens. The expectations are elevated, the gossip keener, the hazards immense. And when labor ultimately commences, the world contracts. You're escorted to a dimmed chamber, windows shrouded, images of saints arranged around you. Candles glimmer along the walls, shadows leaping like restless spirits. The space transforms into what they term a lying-in room, sealed against malevolent entities. It's warm, crowded, and heavy with the aroma of smoldering herbs and apprehension. You cry out. Naturally you do. There's no alleviation for the pain, just clenching, groaning, chanting, and praying. The women surrounding you, your attendants, the midwives, perhaps a few aristocratic ladies, provide solace, or at least attempt to. Some clasp your hands. One might murmur a supplication in your ear repeatedly like a soothing melody. But you're truly isolated in this, completely, profoundly alone in your torment. Hours elapse, perhaps days. You lose sense of time. The world dissolves into a haze of warmth and torment and intensifying pressure. You shout until your voice falters. You faint and revive. You believe you hear someone mention it's crowning. But it could equally be the final invocation you'll ever perceive. And then, If fortune favors you, a wail, a fresh voice, fierce and indignant, cutting through the candle haze. A midwife elevates the infant aloft, declaring the gender with quivering solemnity. A boy, she announces, or perhaps a girl, and the court beyond responds accordingly. You don't even glimpse the baby initially. Oh, you're too fatigued, too bloodied, too fragmented to rise. But someone eventually places the newborn in your arms, and for a brief, fleeting, golden instant, you experience pure, unadulterated delight. It's yours. This small, wriggling being is yours, and then you recall, he doesn't truly belong to you. He belongs to the realm. If it's a son, he's the successor. And your status soars immediately. You're no longer merely the queen. You're the parent of the future, a living safeguard against inheritance disputes. Your chambers overflow with offerings. Your name is chanted in sanctuaries. And abruptly, everyone seeks your views on nursery setups, on pacts, on the hue of the garment the infant should don for his debut at court. If it's a girl, the felicitations persist, but they're subtler, gentler. A courtier might note how daughters serve as excellent negotiating tools for forthcoming unions. Another might remind you that queens produce numerous offspring, and there's always another opportunity. The obscure truth, sometimes if the queen delivered a boy, coins were struck within hours. Small, hastily impressed medallions proclaiming, "This realm has an heir, all is well." If you bore a girl, well, no coins, perhaps a banquet if luck prevailed. And here emerges the academic debate. Did childbirth enhance a queen's political authority or further ensnare her? Some contend that motherhood bestowed queens with sway command over the royal nursery, a position at the Regency Council if the king perished. Others highlight that it rendered queens more exposed, subjected to perilous deliveries repeatedly, diminished to ambulatory nurseries whose utility depended on their progeny's well-being. The response, as ever, varies based on who you were, where you governed, and how fortunate your physique proved. You're swaddled in fresh linens now, supported by cushions, your complexion still pallid and waxen. But the infant breathes. You breathe. The bells toll across the metropolis, the kingdom celebrates, and you shut your eyes and attempt to disregard that this is only the initial cycle. You've endured childbirth. That in itself renders you somewhat miraculous. Now, as the days merge into a fog of moist cloths, gentle cradle songs, and acute pelvic discomfort, you start to adjust to your new identity, not just as queen, not just as spouse, but as something far more taxing, royal parent. And with that designation comes another transformation, one less about endurance and more about display. You can scarcely sit erect, but the court already anticipates you'll resume appearing the part. And appearing the part, as it emerges, is a constant occupation. Your attire becomes a platform, and every stratum you don is political. Every shade, every border, every ornament conveys a statement. I am majestic, I am fecund, I am resilient. But above all, it declares, I am deserving of obedience. You're no longer dressing to captivate a husband. You're dressing to remind the realm that you belong, that you've generated evidence of your authority in the form of a living, breathing successor. You're not to be overlooked, disregarded, or supplanted. Not yet, at any rate. In the royal wardrobe, there's no concept of casual attire. There are only layers: chemise, kirtle, gown, surcoat, mantle silk, velvet, fur, embroidery so delicate it resembles lace, threaded with genuine gold, jewels affixed directly to sleeves. You don't merely wear your wealth, you carry it trailing behind you, sewn into hems and clinging to your arms. Your crown alone could purchase a modest village and still leave funds for a church bell. And yet, beneath it all, you chafe. The brocade is rigid. The pearls irritate your collarbone. Some of the fur linings smell of damp storage, especially in winter when drying is unreliable. You yearn for soft linen shifts, for bare feet on warm stones, for a moment free of stays and pins. But queens don't receive comfort. They receive presence. Now, here's the complicated part. You don't fully select your wardrobe, not completely. A royal tailor does that. So does your chamberlain. And sometimes, for amusement, your mother-in-law opines. Your body is essentially loaned to the crown, and so is the material that envelops it. If a foreign diplomat visits, they'll expect you to wear a specific hue, perhaps blue to symbolize purity or red to evoke strength. If it's Easter, your garments will be stitched with lilies and crosses. If it's Advent, out come the dark velvet and silver threads. Every season demands a costume shift. Historical tidbit: Queen Isabella of Castile's wardrobe records are among the most detailed surviving from the period. She possessed an array of gowns classified by function: diplomatic, devotional, ceremonial, and hunting. Yes, hunting in a floor-length gown with wolves nearby. Royal fashion prioritized display over practicality, more about strutting in the midst of a mire. And then, of course, there are the accessories. Jewels inherited from forebears, rings inscribed with Latin phrases you're expected to recite in refined discourse, belts that serve as reliquaries containing saints' hair or bone fragments, not because you're superstitious, heaven forbid, but because everyone else is. And a properly blessed belt might prevent your uterus from prolapsing. Or so they claim. One of your most emblematic accessories is the veil. Delicate, translucent, sometimes almost imperceptible. But don't be misled. It's not solely for modesty. The veil signals that you are distinct, a woman of honor, a woman who doesn't need to meet your gaze directly to demand your compliance. And yet, you still perceive through it. You see everything. Beneath all this splendor, there's a practical purpose for the display. You're establishing your own visual command. The king may govern by blade and stamp, but you govern by presence. In a crowded court, where half the nobles believe they could perform your role better, your gown is your shield. You may not wield a sword, but you traverse a room just as effectively. You begin to learn the principles of fashion diplomacy. If a visiting queen appears in emerald green edged with fox fur, you don sapphire velvet and ermine, because you must eclipse her without making it evident. Too much ostentation, and you're vain. Too little, and you're dull. 1 inch too long on your train, and you're ridiculed for extravagance. 1 inch too short, and you're charged with disrespecting court conventions. It's a labyrinth constructed of silk. There's a particularly odd, obscure fact from Burgundy, where aristocratic women occasionally wore tall, cone-shaped hats called hennons, so elongated and absurd they required internal supports. These hats grew so elaborate that some cathedrals prohibited them because the ladies couldn't navigate the aisle without stooping. Imagine inclining before the altar and having your hat skewer the priest. Of course, men's attire is equally ridiculous, but no one seems to care. A nobleman can resemble a plucked parrot in velvet stockings and a codpiece the size of a melon and still be regarded seriously. But if your hem rises an inch too high, the court gasps in shock. There's a scholarly debate around this, as you might anticipate. Some historians argue that queens employed fashion as a form of subtle defiance, making understated declarations of power within acceptable aesthetics. Others insist that fashion was merely another means of control, a way to keep queens decorative and compliant. Maybe both are valid. You certainly feel like you're performing incessantly, but you also observe how people listen more attentively when you wear the heavy jeweled belt versus the simple linen sash. The symbols matter, and you learn to wield them. Eventually, you begin directing the wardrobe staff more assertively. You request brighter hues. You commission new textiles. You have your seamstress add secret pockets, yes, actual ones for letters or prayer beads. You choose gold embroidery in the shape of hawks because your family crest featured hawks, and because everyone needs a reminder that you are not to be underestimated. And you begin to grasp the power and visibility. The court doesn't always want to hear you, but they always see you. Every banquet, every procession, every mass, you're there, and you are radiant. Even when your ribs are bruised from your corset, even when you can barely raise your arms from the weight of your sleeves, you smile. You float. You glide. Because in this world, appearing as a queen is half the battle. You might not be able to voice your thoughts yet, but you can shine so brilliantly that no one dares avert their gaze. From the outside, your inner circle appears like an ideal team of impeccably attired, perfectly obedient women who move in sync with you and laugh when you do. Your ladies-in-waiting, they're always given delicate titles like attendants or maidens trail you like shadows. They assist in dressing you, escort you to chapel, retrieve your perfumed gloves, and hold your hand during especially tense suppers with foreign diplomats. But behind those wide-eyed smiles and tightly laced bodices is a web of subtle plotters eager for sway. And you're positioned in the center, attempting to discern who's faithful and who's merely tallying points. Your ladies hail from aristocratic families, naturally. Being appointed to the queen is an honor, in theory. In practice, it's also a strategic maneuver. Their clans send them to maintain proximity to the throne. Some are daughters hoping for advantageous marriage proposals. Others are nieces of bishops or cousins of foreign queens. One might even be your sister, which makes everything 10 times more awkward. The expectation is that these women will serve you with humility and elegance. The reality is that they serve the court first, their family second, and maybe you a distant third if fortune favors. Still, you develop attachments. How could you not? They witness you at your lowest, retching from morning sickness, sobbing over lost pregnancies, pacing in anger. When your husband returns late from hunting, they know when you're feigning a headache to avoid the assembly. When your smile is held together by resentment, you spend more hours with them than with your king. They're the only ones who see the authentic you concealed beneath the crown. But there's always a price. A lady who grows too intimate might be accused of influencing you. Another might secretly envy your position and attempt to overshadow you at court. And naturally, some are outright spies. Innocent chatter shared in the comfort of your room can reach your husband's ears by evening. You learn swiftly that even a yawn can be turned into a weapon. One particularly disturbing truth: some of your ladies might be sharing your husband's bed. Not formally, of course. No one admits it. But in a court brimming with wine and lengthy winter evenings, the boundary between attendant and allure blurs rapidly. You can't confront them without sparking controversy. And besides, the fault would land on you. Were you distant, inattentive, too occupied with embroidering altar cloths to satisfy your husband? People always find a way to blame you. Take Catherine Howard, fifth wife of Henry VIII. Her ladies-in-waiting played a direct role in her downfall, either by facilitating her clandestine meetings or by testifying against her when circumstances soured. What began as whispers in the women's quarters ended with Catherine kneeling on a scaffold, her name forever entangled in court treachery. That's the sort of peril that slumbers at the foot of your bed. But not all of it is venom. Sometimes there are instances of genuine comfort, a chuckle during dressing, a shared morsel of candied ginger sneaked from the kitchens, a melody sung softly while your hair is combed. For a few minutes, the court politics dissolve, and you recall you're just a woman among other women who also didn't select this existence. Some are merely trying to endure in silk slippers that don't fit properly. There's also a hierarchy among them, naturally. The mistress of the robes ranks highest, supervising the daily operations of your wardrobe and schedule. She's your unofficial agenda keeper, manners enforcer, and sometimes your staunchest defender or greatest foe. Below her are the maids of honor, typically younger and unwed, fluttering about with wide eyes and murmuring aspirations of catching a handsome knight's attention. And then there are the elder women widows, distant kin, former favorites who've witnessed 5 queens come and go and harbor no delusions about the role. Obscure detail that's oddly charming. Sometimes your ladies developed intricate inside jokes and signals used to communicate across crowded halls. A fan snapped twice might signify that nobleman smells like goose fat, while adjusting your gloves could be code for, "I'm bored, rescue me." These mini-languages are never documented, of course, but they're lifelines during endless ceremonies where your smile is frozen and your corset is gradually suffocating you. Over time, you learn to reward loyalty subtly. A favored lady might receive a bolt of imported silk as a gift. Another gets a prime seat at a feast. These aren't mere courtesies, they're signals. Everyone observes whom you favor. Everyone wants to be next. If someone falls from grace, it's noticed immediately. Her duties are reassigned. Her name ceases to arise. Eventually, she might be discreetly returned to her family, her belongings packed before you even have a chance to bid farewell. This brings us to a lingering scholarly debate. Did queens have real agency through their household staff, or were they merely figureheads surrounded by overseers? Some historians argue that a clever queen could control narratives and influence court politics by managing her ladies strategically. Others believe the queen's household was a cage of lace and courtesy, with real decisions made by men who considered embroidery more suitable than diplomacy. As usual, both can be true. You learn how to be heard through echoes, how to plant ideas, how to shape alliances by ensuring the right lady repeats the right version of events in the right corridor. It's exhausting, a 24/7 performance of grace, gratitude, and guardedness. You cry less, you nod more. You stop reacting when one of your maids flinches at a name you thought was harmless. You develop the kind of poise that only comes from being surrounded by people who could ruin you with a single careless sentence. But you also grow sharper. You start learning who serves which factions, who's ambitious, who's scared. You notice the lady who stays up late writing letters, the one who always gets a little too close to your brother-in-law. the one who hides her intelligence behind a nervous laugh. You build your web not of silk, but of whispered loyalty, of knowing when to hold a hand and when to let it go. Because here's the truth, no one told you as a little girl playing with dolls in the garden. The queen's greatest weapon isn't her crown, or her beauty, or even her womb. It's her memory. Breakfast, if you're fortunate, is a warm oat cake, a slice of soft cheese and something sweet, figs and syrup perhaps, or apples stewed with cinnamon. But most mornings you're not even hungry. The court has already been stirring for hours. The priests are midway through matins, and your stomach knots tighter than your laces. You sit at the high table, flanked by noble women, trying to appear serene while chewing each bite as if it might be poisoned. You're not paranoid yet. Exactly. But you're also not naive. A queen can't afford either. Food in the medieval court is theater, much like everything else. It isn't about satiating hunger. It's about status, symbolism, and surviving a menu that could extend to 14 courses, most of them drowning in sauces and dubious spices. You don't just eat, you're seen eating. You're watched for what you consume, how much you consume, and whether you eat first. Because in the hierarchy of medieval feasting, the sequence of bites matters as much as the flavor. A typical royal meal is a sensory overload. Roasted swan presented with feathers reattached for drama, spiced peacock glazed and shimmering like something from a fever dream, fish shaped into pastry towers filled with herbs and wild mushrooms. There's mead, of course, and wine diluted with snow, pitchers of almond milk for the particularly pious. It sounds luxurious until you realize most of it has been prepared in kitchens without chimneys, by perspiring men with knives and very loose notions of hygiene. And once it reaches your plate, you're supposed to nibble delicately, smile, and continue as though your digestive system isn't bracing for upheaval. There's a proper method for eating everything. You dab sauces with pieces of bread called trenchers. You sip wine slowly between blessings. You keep your hands visible. If you drop something, someone will hurry to retrieve it, but heaven help you if you touch the floor yourself. And all the while, you must engage in conversation, pleasant, effortless, diplomatic conversation, even when your mouth is full of overcooked pheasant and your teeth ache from all the preserved fruit. The real challenge isn't the food, it's the fasting. You're expected to adhere to the church calendar with sacred strictness. That means no meat, dairy, or eggs on certain days, sometimes for weeks. During Lent, it's fish, and more fish, not the fresh kind either. We're talking salt cod so tough it could serve as roofing. But you smile. You act like it's penance. Because piety is another form of performance, and queens are expected to lead by example, even if their stomachs rebel quietly beneath layers of whalebone. Here's a historical fact that's both intriguing and unsettling. In some courts, pregnant queens were permitted to skip fasting, but only if a priest deemed it safe for the child. So yes, your unborn baby had to be pre-approved by the church before you could indulge in a cheese tart. The moral burden of your meal is constantly assessed by people who've never been pregnant, never worn a corset, and definitely never gone 12 hours without a snack. And yet, food is power. Lavish feasts are how kings display their wealth, how nobles are enticed into loyalty, how treaties are commemorated. Your position at the table says everything. Are you seated next to the bishop or the foreign ambassador? Are you served before the duchess or after? Even your plate gold, silver, or pewter signals your rank. A misplaced goblet can become a court scandal, One spoiled dish could spark rumors of poison. You sit surrounded by platters of gilded goose and candied quince, and still you eat with suspicion. The obscure fun. Sometimes the food itself was a jest. Medieval chefs, bored between conflicts, loved creating illusion dishes like fake eggs made from almond paste, meat pies that squawked when opened because live birds were concealed inside. Yes, someone actually thought, "What if we made the dinner scream?" And someone else said, "Brilliant." Of course, behind the spectacle is the daily routine. Your private meals are simpler: broths, bread, poached pears, maybe a bit of pigeon if you're lucky. Your ladies-in-waiting often dine with you, heads bowed, murmuring soft gossip between bites. There's a quiet rhythm to those moments. No trumpets, no toasts, just spoons tapping gently against ceramic, and a rare chance to let your shoulders relax. But even there, food is rarely just food. A certain dish might indicate the king's mood if eels are served. Perhaps he's been in contact with his Flemish allies. If sweetmeats arrive unannounced, perhaps he's feeling guilty about something. You learn to interpret the menu like a language-coded, subtle, often bitter, beneath the sugar. There's a debate among scholars about how much control queens had over their own kitchens. Some evidence suggests that certain queens managed vast culinary staffs and chose what was served at their tables. Others argue that food was a deeply gendered domain. Men ran the kitchens, designed the feasts, and the queen simply nodded and chewed. The truth likely varied. In wealthier courts, queens could exert significant influence through hospitality, offering rare delicacies to allies, fasting conspicuously to demonstrate piety, or even gifting spices as diplomatic gestures. After all, a pouch of saffron was worth more than gold in many regions. You start noticing how guests behave around food, who waits for the blessing and who sneaks a bite, who drinks too much before the third course, who accidentally spills wine on the bishop. These details matter. In a place where emotions are forbidden and politics are whispered behind veils, the feast becomes a kind of theater, and you're always center stage. But tonight, you're weary. You've nodded through 7 courses, 3 toasts, and a poem recited by a man with wine-stained lips and no sense of rhythm. Your temples throb. You haven't tasted anything since the first bite. Your plate remains full, so you set down your spoon, murmur something about an early morning prayer, and excuse yourself. As you rise, the room quiets slightly, just for a beat. Your gown shimmers as you pass. Your ladies follow precisely. You don't trip, you don't sway, you don't pause, because a queen must always leave the table before the meal turns sour. Every day begins with a prayer, not because you're especially holy, not yet, but because everyone around you expects it. The castle chapel is always cold, regardless of the season. Stone floors draw the warmth from your slippers, and incense lingers in the air like a thick mist that clings to your veil. The priest starts his chant, his voice rising and falling like a lullaby sung by a man who hasn't smiled since last Epiphany. You kneel, murmur along, and try to ignore the creeping numbness in your feet. This isn't just devotion, it's policy. Your piety is public property. You're a medieval queen, and religion is woven into every aspect of your existence. It dictates your meals, your clothing, your intimate life, your bathing routine, and even your childbirth practices. It defines your very identity as queen, not just a ruler's wife, but a sacred figure in her own right, chosen by God to birth and nurture the next anointed monarch. Divine right doesn't just apply to kings, it touches you too. albeit through the lens of obedience, humility, and endless ritual. Your confessor is one of the most influential people in your life, part priest, part counselor, part informant. He hears your secrets, at least the ones you're brave enough to whisper, and offers absolution, or at least a stern lecture and a prescribed number of Hail Marys. He might be kind or cold or just endlessly weary, but he's always there, a silent presence in your shadow, ready to remind you of your sins whether you asked or not. And don't think your confessions are just between you two. He's a cleric in service to the court. If your soul starts sounding too risky, word will reach the king. You wear religious jewelry, a cross perhaps, or a pendant containing a saint's bone fragment. Your rooms are adorned with holy imagery, a tapestry of the Virgin Mary over your bed, an altar in the corner lit with beeswax candles. You're expected to attend Mass almost daily, sponsor feast day celebrations, and oversee the palace's charitable efforts. Ill people, lepers, and pregnant peasant women are paraded before you regularly. You touch them gently, offer a smile, hand over coins as if dispensing divine favor. And in a way, you are. Queens are supposed to embody mercy, but mercy has a dress code. You must look radiant while fasting. You must sing hymns through gritted teeth while your husband flirts with some baroness. You must give thanks to God even when you miscarry or lose your third child, or your father dies across the sea and you can't even attend his funeral. You kneel and you pray and you smile. The religious calendar rules everything. Advent, Epiphany, Lent, Easter, Pentecost, Assumption, All Saints. It's a cycle of feast and famine, joy and sorrow. During Holy Week, you're not just expected to fast, you must participate in public displays of humility. Some queens wash the feet of the poor, not symbolically, literally. 12 peasant women, cleaned for the occasion, would sit before you while you poured lukewarm water over their cracked feet, gently patting them dry with embroidered cloth, all while a scribe took notes for the year's chronicle. It sounds noble, and maybe sometimes it even feels that way, but more often, it's exhausting. Your faith is weaponized by courtiers, clergy, your in-laws. If you speak too boldly, you're arrogant. If you're silent too long, you're either scheming or despondent. If you pray too much, you're holy. If you don't, you're impious. The same people who bow at your feet today will mutter about your vanity tomorrow. So you maintain the perfect balance of holiness, visible, measured, soft around the edges. Historical side note: Queen Marguerite of Navarre wrote spiritual poems and secret, beautiful philosophical reflections on faith, doubt, and divine love. But publicly, she still wore the mask of the ideal Catholic queen. Many noble women were deeply religious, but they had to pretend their insights came from visions or dreams. A learned woman couldn't be trusted. A holy woman was much easier to accept. But not all of your religious experiences are performative. In the quiet moments when the chapel is empty and the wind howls through the cloisters, you do sometimes feel something genuine. You pray for your children, for your health, for the safety of your siblings, for peace, and you don't always know if anyone's listening. Sometimes you're not even sure, but the ritual helps. The rhythm, the candles, the Latin phrases you don't fully understand. It gives shape to your fears. There's a long-standing scholarly debate about whether queens used religion as a genuine expression of faith or as a carefully managed political tool. Some historians argue queens leaned into religious life as a form of subtle resistance, building influence through convents, patronage, and spiritual networks. Others claim it was all theater, controlled by men. But honestly, for you, it's both. Religion is the language of power, but also the only place you're allowed to cry. You begin to build your own circle of religious advisors, not just the court-appointed chaplain, but mystics and abbots, abbesses from nearby convents, wandering friars with strange prophecies. Some bring comfort, others bring discomfort wrapped in incense and vague warnings. One tells you your dreams are omens, another says your last miscarriage was God testing your humility. You thank them all. You believe none fully, and yet you keep returning to the chapel. You light candles for the child you lost. You sing psalms during storms. You kiss the feet of stone saints and feel nothing. Then one morning you cry during the Agnus Dei and don't know why. Maybe it's real. Maybe it's hormonal. Maybe it's just the only place you're allowed to fall apart. Your confessor writes to Rome about your virtue. He says you are a pious queen, a model for all, a jewel of the church. He writes this with the same pen he uses to report your conversations to the cardinal. But still, you let him write it. You need the protection. And besides, every queen needs a narrative. Yours, for now, is one of quiet holiness, whether or not it's true. You never really liked Chestnut until now, not until you realize that at court, the game isn't just diversion, it's instruction, strategy, a reflected version of your reality. The king is slow and cautious, advancing one square at a time, shielded on all sides. The knights leap at odd angles. The bishops slice sharp diagonals across the board, holy but lethal. But it's the queen who holds the real power, fast, flexible, devastating. She can move anywhere. So of course they made her the most dangerous piece, and of course, no one wants to see you play her well. You sit beneath a canopy in the solar, sunlight streaming through diamond-paned windows, your skirts arranged in symmetrical folds. Your opponent is a visiting countess, or perhaps a courtly knight who knows better than to win. Around you, the court lounges in calculated elegance, pretending not to watch as you slide your rook into position. Someone chuckles lightly. Someone else places a bet under their breath. It's all innocent amusement, of course, just a game, just a queen diverting herself. But every move you make is a message. I understand how this works, because you've figured it out now. The game at court is never just one game. It's dozens layered over each other like velvet on armor. Power is everywhere, and it's never where you're told to look. A feast isn't just a feast, it's a loyalty test. A dance isn't just a dance, it's a tactical rehearsal. A compliment could be a trap. A silence could be deadly. And you're in the middle of all of it, threading your way through a minefield while smiling like it's spring. The king has his advisors, lords, knights, priests, the occasional terrifying uncle. But you have your web. You've learned who listens, who repeats, who misquotes. You know how to plant an idea in the morning and hear it echoed by sunset, whispered back to you like someone else's thought. Your influence doesn't come from commands. It comes from suggestion, from small favors, from being the person who remembers. It starts small. A word of praise for a steward's daughter, a subtle nod during a council meeting, a carefully chosen gift to a baron's wife, perhaps a prayer book you knew she desired. These gestures ripple outward. You're not just the queen who wears nice dresses, you're the queen who sees. And people remember that. Historical queens understood this game well. Eleanor of Aquitaine didn't just sit quietly beside her husband. She maneuvered alliances across France and England, turned her children into kings and queens, and still found time to sponsor poets. Catherine de' Medici used banquets and ballets as political theater, each performance a move on the larger board. Their success wasn't because they held swords, it was because they held information. You start attending more councils, even when you're not technically invited. You sit in the back, hands folded, eyes attentive. You don't speak, at least not at first, but your presence alone changes things. Men fidget, arguments cool. Someone always ends up explaining a decision to you later just to keep you informed. And with each explanation, you gather more pieces. You build your map. Then, slowly, you speak. Just one suggestion, one observation, something harmless. Shouldn't the grain reserves be checked before winter? They nod. They agree. It's common sense, but it's also yours. Your voice enters the room like a breeze no one noticed until it stirred the curtains. You host salons in the evenings, nothing formal, just chess, poetry, the occasional lute. But the guest list is precise. Every person there is someone you want to hear from, someone you want to distract. You serve rare delicacies from your own treasury, not the king's. You provide warmth, music, and gentle laughter. It feels casual. It's not. You are studying your nobles like a battlefield, watching where they stand, who they flatter, who they ignore. There's a fringe detail from a French court where the queen kept a notebook of courtly debts, not financial, but social. Who owed her favors? Who had she rescued from embarrassment? Who had borrowed her scribe or her seamstress? She called it her book of obligations, and rumor has it, it was more effective than the kingdom's entire tax ledger. You begin to keep your own version, a mental tally perhaps, or small notes tucked between the pages of a psalter. Quiet leverage, just in case. Of course, there are risks. If you move too boldly, they'll call you meddlesome. If you're too quiet, you'll be forgotten. You have to strike a delicate balance, present but not overpowering, gracious but not passive. And you can't contradict your husband, but you can reframe him. You mention his wisdom, his fairness, his generosity, especially when those qualities aren't evident. In doing so, you set expectations. You hold him to a version of himself that's more convenient for your plans. There's an ongoing scholarly debate over how much influence queens actually had. Some argue their power was mostly ceremonial, confined to patronage and household management. Others point to surviving letters, council records, and foreign accounts that show queens acting as political operators, brokers of alliances, even shadow diplomats. The truth likely shifts from queen to queen. But you know one thing for certain, silence is not absence. Influence doesn't always leave fingerprints. You begin writing letters, not just personal ones, but strategic correspondence to abbesses, foreign noblewomen, cousins in distant courts. You don't write openly about politics that would be improper. You write about children, about feast days, about common friends. And between the lines, in the careful phrasing, you lay out warnings, invitations, quiet shifts in alliance. A word here, a favor there. Ink becomes your sharpest blade. You're no longer playing defense. You're playing chess, real chess, not the board kind, but the kind that could win you loyalty, land, safety, maybe even legacy. Because here's what no one tells you when they place the crown on your head. The queen may not rule the kingdom, but she knows exactly how it runs. The crowds are cheering again, which means you're doing your job, or at least appearing to. You sit tall in the carved, velvet-draped carriage, hands folded perfectly in your lap, your expression soft but aloof, just the right amount of noble detachment. Outside, peasants wave branches and shout blessings, though most are just hoping for a coin toss or a glimpse of your jewels. You smile, never too wide. A queen should always appear gracious but not giddy. You must look like something admired, unreachable, not quite real. Public appearances are your regular performance now. Processions, dedications, visits to churches and monasteries, parades during feast days. You're a walking, breathing icon of royal stability. And if you're not present, people notice. If you miss a celebration, they whisper. If you arrive late to Mass, they wonder if you're ill or worse, if you're pregnant again or not pregnant again. Either way, they turn it into conversation. You have no real say in where you go. The king's advisors plan your outings. The master of the wardrobe decides what you wear. Priests draft your blessings. Guards map your route down to the pace of your horses. You're essentially a royal puppet with a crown-shaped hood. But the public doesn't see that. They see splendor, glory, grace, power, and most of all, hope. You are the mother of the realm, the moral compass of the court, the shining image of God's order on earth. They don't need to know how tired you are. And you are tired. Every outing is hours of work, posing, walking, listening to long sermons in cold cathedrals, accepting flowers from sticky-handed children whose parents whisper about taxes and famine. You kneel before altars, accept dedications, break bread with abbots, and say, "May God bless your harvest," while knowing full well the grain stores are 3 days from empty. But the spectacle matters. Medieval monarchies are built on image as much as authority. Your public appearances reassure the people that the kingdom is strong, moral, and under divine favor. The king might be away hunting or waging a half-hearted war, but you are here, reminding them that someone is watching, someone is praying for them. You're not just ornamental, you're symbolic. And yet, despite all the fanfare, you sign nothing. You enact no laws. You sit beside the throne, but never on it. You have titles, endless, flowery titles, but they come with no real power, just the illusion of it. Unless the king grants it, unless the council approves, unless you happen to be regent during a war or while your son is still teething. Historical fact. Queen Philippa of Hainault, wife of Edward III, once rode out in armor to plead with her husband to spare a captured town. She wasn't part of the king's council. She didn't command troops, but her public performance kneeling before the king in front of the townspeople moved him to mercy. That's what queens do. Influence outcomes not by force, but by presence. Persuasion wrapped in protocol. It's a strange cage made of silk and incense. You're adored but not consulted, praised but not obeyed. You give speeches someone else wrote. You attend ceremonies someone else planned. You nod while clerics recite your own prayers back to you. And yet, if you show even the slightest hesitation, if your smile falters, or you forget the words to the Magnificat, people notice. They assume scandal or rebellion or sin. Your household staff knows the routine. Before each outing, your hair is arranged like a living sculpture. Your gown is brushed, stitched, scented. Your hands are rubbed with rose oil to hide the rough patches no queen is supposed to have. Even your horse, if you ride, is fitted with a saddle draped in crimson cloth embroidered with your family crest. You are packaged like a holy object one false move, and the whole illusion risks shattering. There's a fringe practice that's both fascinating and a little ridiculous. In some royal courts, the queen's footsteps were tracked literally. On major feast days, her shoes were dusted with fine flour so that her steps left visible prints on the floor of the cathedral or palace. People would rush to kneel in them afterward, hoping to absorb some measure of holiness or favor, as if your shoes hadn't been filled with blisters 15 minutes into the procession. And the pressure goes beyond the public. You're also expected to host the nobility in style, lavish dinners, tournaments, masked balls, all planned to reinforce your family's wealth and your husband's dominion. If a foreign envoy visits, you must flatter them in their language. If a bishop drops by, you must quote scripture and offer gifts. One poorly executed dinner could offend an entire duchy. One misstep in etiquette could jeopardize an alliance. It's not just showing up and smiling, it's diplomacy and brocade. Scholars have long debated whether queens were complicit in the performance of power or victims of it. Some argue that queens manipulated court ritual to their advantage, using public devotion and ceremonial events to build influence. Others argue that these performances only reinforce their lack of real agency, trapping them in a gilded role with no escape. But you're beginning to see the truth for what it is. The performance is the power if you play it right. You've learned how to make subtle statements. You wear a foreign fabric on a feast day when trade negotiations are fragile. You kiss a peasant child's forehead in a region known for rebellion. You choose a religious relic associated with healing when plague rumors spread. Nothing you do is accidental, and even when you act out of instinct or fatigue, the court will find meaning in it, so you may as well give them something useful to interpret. And then there are the moments that almost feel real. When you lock eyes with a girl in the crowd and she beams like you're a blessing from heaven. When a widow grips your hand and thanks you for remembering her husband's name. When you hear the bells ringing for your arrival and, just for a second, feel like maybe you belong in this world of velvet and candles. But the moment never lasts. Someone always clears their throat. The carriage jerks forward, your veil slips slightly, and a lady-in-waiting darts forward to adjust it. The crowd cheers louder. You sit back, spine straight, face composed. The queen is watching, but she is also being watched, always. He's gone again. The king, your husband, your sovereign, whatever title you're supposed to utter with reverence when his name arises in prayer or at dinner. He's off, charging into a war you weren't consulted about, or maybe just inspecting distant estates and asserting dominance over nobles with rebellious inclinations. Wherever he is, he departed without much farewell. Maybe a kiss on the cheek, maybe not. He rode out with his retinue of knights and squires and banners flapping like bird wings, leaving behind a castle echoing with too much silence, and a court that suddenly turns its full attention to you. When the king is away, the queen sometimes rules. Not always, not officially. But if the kingdom doesn't crumble in his absence, someone has to keep things running. And guess who's still here? Sitting on a cushion that never quite feels comfortable, surrounded by men who smile too much, and clerics who speak in riddles. You don't sign laws, not without his seal, but you might oversee petitions, respond to correspondence, and ensure grain shipments arrive in the correct province. You listen to disputes between local nobles, play hostess to foreign dignitaries, and lead prayer services for the king's safe return. You nod through council meetings where half the men pretend not to hear you, and the other half act like everything you say is revolutionary, even when it's just common sense. And through it all, you're watched, especially now, when the king is gone. Every choice you make is magnified. Every glance, every whispered word, every decision questioned. Is your tone too sharp? Too soft? And if a letter from the king arrives with vague instructions, you're expected to interpret it flawlessly. If no letter comes at all, you're still supposed to know exactly what he'd want. Queen. Meet mind reading, it's your new full-time job. Some queens handled this transition with ruthless efficiency. Blanche of Castile acted as regent for her young son Louis IX and effectively ran France during his minority. She managed finances, quelled rebellions, and held court like a seasoned general wrapped in pearls. Others weren't so fortunate. A misplaced judgment, a poorly timed letter, and suddenly the court turned hostile, accusing the queen of ambition, arrogance, or worse, treasonous intent. Because when you wield power as a woman, it's never just power, it's always suspect. You sit at the head of the great hall now, his chair beside you ominously empty. The nobles glance at it more than they glance at you. Some defer to your decisions out of respect or fear of being noticed not deferring. Others just wait for you to err. And a few, the clever ones, test you. They bring trivial matters to see how you'll respond. A dispute over grazing rights, a conflict between two minor houses, a border skirmish that's probably festered for years. If you dismiss it, you're careless. If you intervene, you're meddling. So you learn to tread lightly and speak slowly. You echo your husband's past decisions when it suits. You invoke his name when you need to remind them you can wield his authority indirectly. And when it feels safe, you make your own call. Something small, something precise, something that will go unnoticed until it succeeds. Back in your chambers, the real work happens. You meet with your steward, your chaplain, your private secretary. You read letters meant for the king, scan reports on harvests and merchant taxes, approve repairs to roads and bridges. The decisions aren't glamorous, but they're vital. You don't hold court with a sword in hand, you hold it with ledgers and seals, and memorized names of men who think you've forgotten them. You haven't. There's a strange, obscure fact here. Some queens, while acting as regents or interim rulers, had their secretaries write letters in the king's voice. The seal, the tone, the phrasing, all matched what the king would have said, even if he was nowhere near a quill. This wasn't deception, it was expected. You kept the machine running until the king returned and took credit for what you did. You wonder sometimes if he'll notice, if he'll ask how you managed to keep the southern provinces from starving, or why the bishop's complaints suddenly ceased, but mostly he doesn't. He returns with blood on his boots and a fresh scar on his temple, and sits in his chair like he never left. The nobles cheer, the banners are lowered, and you move one seat over again, smiling as if you didn't just keep the kingdom breathing. Scholars debate whether queens ruling in their husband's absence held real executive power or merely served as placeholders. The answer, as always, is both. You have no power on paper, but immense power in motion. The quills, the silences, the side-eye across the council table, they all add up to influence, not authority, but close enough when used properly. You learn the names of villages you'll never visit, lords you've never met, problems you'll never fully solve. You make peace with the unfinished. You master the art of suggestion. You sign letters with phrases like, "in accordance with His Majesty's known wishes," even when you have no idea what his wishes would have been. You become fluent in the politics of maybe. And sometimes, just sometimes, things go right. The grain arrives on time, the nobles quiet down, the tax dispute vanishes. And in the quiet glow of evening, while the fire crackles in the hearth and your steward brings news of a minor victory, you feel something close to pride. You've held the court together. You've kept the chaos at bay. And the best part, no one knows how hard it really was, because you made it look easy, which means you played the role perfectly. Court is not a place for friendship. It's a place for proximity, performance, and politely veiled threats wrapped in brocade. And nowhere is that more evident than in your own halls, among the ladies who smile too hard and the lords who linger just a little too long in conversation. You learn quickly that rivalries aren't just petty squabbles. They are warfare conducted with fans and curtsies, envy disguised as etiquette. And often your fiercest enemies don't sit across the table, they sit right next to you. One of your biggest threats might be family. Your sister, for example, brought to court as a companion, young and clever and glowing with that effortless charm that makes courtiers lean in and bishops lose their train of thought. She smiles at you like she did in the nursery, but her eyes measure everything. Your robes, your jewelry, your place beside the king. She might love you. She might want your crown. The two are not mutually exclusive. And then there are the stepchildren. If your husband had previous wives and many medieval kings, did you probably inherited their offspring at court. They're polite, of course, trained from birth in deference. But every time you look at them, you see the eyes of the woman who came before. You're not their mother, you never will be. And if your husband's affection for them runs deep, that becomes leverage they can use against you, especially if they're grown, especially if they want the throne. Don't underestimate the religious figures either. The abbess who visits every feast day, the young nun who was once your husband's cousin, the bishop's niece with the miraculous singing voice and suspiciously expensive prayer books. These women don't need to shout or scheme. Their weapons are subtler. Whispered judgments about your piety, strategic charity, devotion that turns into popularity. Nothing burns quite like holiness sharpened into a dagger. Court intrigue feels like theater at first. It's all arched looks and careful wording, subtle snubs at banquets, compliments with invisible hooks. That color suits you so well, Your Grace. It hides the exhaustion beautifully. But beneath the velvet gloves, it's all claws. One look, one rumor, one small error in judgment, and you're slipping down a ladder you didn't even know you were climbing. And let's talk rumors. They spread faster than fire and cling longer than perfume. One day you're the gracious queen who distributed bread during Lent. The next, you're the cold foreigner who favors her own kin and squanders the crown's money on her cousins. Maybe someone saw you laughing with a young knight in the corridor. Maybe someone claims they saw you crying in the chapel. It doesn't matter if it's true. The story gets told and retold, and every time you're painted just a shade darker. There's a fringe story about a queen whose maid accused her of feeding her husband a love potion in his wine, not because it happened, but because the maid had been dismissed for stealing a hairbrush. Within a week, the court was buzzing with tales of sorcery and seduction. The queen had to hold a public mass and take communion barefoot just to prove her soul wasn't dancing with the devil. Court life is fun like that. You try to build allies. You reward loyalty, share confidences carefully, compliment daughters of powerful houses, but no alliance is forever. Someone's favor today is someone else's betrayal tomorrow. You might be close to a duchess for 5 years, and then discover that she's been sending letters to your husband's mistress the entire time. You might take in a poor noblewoman after her father's execution, only to have her repay you by stealing a locket from your bedside. And when you confront her, she'll cry. Of course she'll cry. That's the final twist of the knife. Every now and then, you do make a real friend, a woman who understands the tightrope walk, who's smart enough not to cling too closely but steady enough to hold your gaze across the hall and remind you that you're not completely alone. These bonds are rare and you guard them fiercely. But even then, you keep a part of yourself hidden, not because you want to, because you have to. Scholars often argue about the nature of female rivalry in royal courts. Was it born of powerlessness, or was it simply politics? Did queens and noblewomen fight each other because they had no better outlet, or because they knew exactly how to compete? The answer, as usual, is complicated. Women at court learned to navigate power in whatever ways were allowed, and sometimes those paths ran straight through each other. You grow wary of praise, suspicious of gifts. Every embroidered handkerchief might have a message stitched into it. Every poem recited at dinner could be mocking you between the rhymes. A compliment from a rival is like sugar on poisoned fruit. You smile, thank her, and toss it into the fire later, just in case. Even the king can become a rival in his own way. If he starts to believe you're too clever, too popular, too independent, he might begin to pull back. He might replace your ladies with his own, humiliate you publicly, revoke your funding, or suddenly decide that your influence is dangerous. You learn to temper your victories, celebrate quietly, accept credit with humility, always attributing your ideas to His Majesty's wisdom. And still, you endure, you outmaneuver, you survive. Because the truth no one speaks aloud is this: in a court full of masks, the Queen's mask must never slip. You must smile at your enemy while planning her downfall. You must cry in private and laugh in public. You must pretend not to notice the dagger being passed behind your back. You must forgive, or at least perform forgiveness, because vengeance, when it comes, must arrive disguised as divine justice. It's exhausting, it's cruel, it's unrelenting, and it is exactly how the game is played. It begins with a dull ache low in your belly, the kind that wraps around your spine and sits there like a stone. You say nothing at first. You're too used to discomfort. Corsets, ceremonies, court politics. What's one more strange twinge in a body you've barely controlled since you were 14? But within an hour, the ache sharpens. By midday, you can't walk without gripping the edge of your chair. And by sunset, the midwives are lighting candles and bustling around your chamber, whispering to each other in clipped, tense tones. You're in labor again. No matter how many times it happens, the fear never fades. Childbirth in your world is a gamble, a brutal, bloody lottery where the prize is survival and the cost is everything. You've already buried one child, maybe two, maybe more. Miscarriages happen quietly here, often unspoken, written off as God's will. You remember them all, their names never given, their rooms never prepared, just a trail of shadows behind each pregnancy that make the next feel even more fragile. This time, everyone says things will be different. They always do. They bring the best midwives, the softest sheets, the most expensive herbs ground into bitter pastes and slipped beneath your tongue. But behind every soothing word, every blessing and prayer, is the truth you know too well. Childbirth kills women, especially queens. Yes, even you, even with the candles and the saints' relics and the walls thick enough to drown out screams. It happens all the time. Somewhere right now, another queen is dying in a blood-soaked bed, while her courtiers argue about succession in the hallway. You've read the stories. You've seen the looks the older noblewomen give you when your belly swells, half sympathy, half dread. The lying-in chamber is stifling, all light blocked, all noise softened. Tapestries hang over the windows to ward off evil spirits. An icon of the Virgin Mary watches from the corner, her painted eyes wide with pity. Your ladies-in-waiting hover like nervous ghosts, fanning you, murmuring prayers, offering warm cloths and sips of wine that taste like smoke and fear. When the pain comes, it's not in waves. It's a rising tide, crushing and constant. You scream, of course. You curse, you beg. Even queens lose dignity when their body is tearing itself open. You grip the arm of a maid until her skin bruises. You bite down on your own knuckles. Hours pass, maybe days. You lose track of time. At some point, a physician appears. He doesn't speak to you directly, only to your midwife. He frowns. There's blood. Too much blood. Someone mentions the baby's position. Someone else lights more candles. You hear the word breach, and your heart cracks open. You know what that means. You've seen what happens. But somehow, miraculously, it ends. You hear a cry thin and wet and full of fury. You weep not from joy, but from sheer exhaustion. A maid presses a warm bundle against your chest. A daughter, she says, like it's an apology. And it is, sort of, because a girl means another pregnancy, another chance at a boy, another trip through this hell. Still, you hold her, you kiss her downy head, you name her something beautiful, something strong, because even if no one else values her, you will. She is yours. And in that moment, everything else, the pain, the risk, the fear, fades. Later, the court responds predictably. For a girl, the smiles are thinner, the feasting quieter. The congratulatory letters arrive more slowly, and most include some variation of, "May God bless you with a son soon." As if she's not enough, as if you're not enough, you pretend not to care. You smile. You sit in the nursery with your newborn, while wet nurses hover and noble women gossip just outside the door. You go through the motions, christening, naming, gifting tiny embroidered gowns. And inside, you count the days until your husband appears again, asking when you'll try for another. A historical aside here, both fascinating and cruel. In some courts, queens were expected to resume public appearances immediately, even after difficult births. One chronicler noted that a queen greeted the court 3 days after lying in with composure and painted cheeks, which sounds impressive until you realize the paint was probably covering bruises and her gown was hiding blood-stained bandages. Scholars still argue about the risks queens faced in childbirth. Some say it was no worse than for any other noblewoman. Others point out that the pressure to produce heirs made the danger even greater, with queens forced into back-to-back pregnancies before their bodies could recover. You're inclined to side with the latter. Your back aches. Your skin hasn't stopped bleeding, and they're already discussing your next lying in. And yet, There's power in this pain, not political power exactly, at least not yet, but something deeper. You've survived something many don't, you've given life, you've held it in your arms, and in a world that values you only for what your body can produce, that act becomes your rebellion. You don't forget the ones who didn't survive, queens and commoners alike. You light candles for them in the chapel, say their names in your head during morning prayer. You remember Queen Jane Seymour, who gave Henry VIII his precious son and died 12 days later, white-lipped and fevered. You remember them all, and you promise yourself, if you survive again, if you must endure this all over, you'll find a way to make it mean something. Because if childbirth is your battlefield, then you will wear every scar like armor. The rules say you must be faithful, utterly, perfectly faithful. Your body belongs to the king. Your thoughts belong to God. And anything outside those lines is heresy, treason, or worse, gossip fodder. But just because the rules are etched in stone doesn't mean they're followed, certainly not by your husband, whose fidelity tends to dissolve the moment a noblewoman tilts her head just right at a feast. The hypocrisy is so thick you could spread it on bread. The court is a theater of flirtation. Everything is coded. A glance across the hall, the brush of a sleeve, the way a hand lingers just a moment too long when offering a goblet. Love poetry circulates like contraband, half original, half borrowed from dead troubadours and passed off as compliments. You receive anonymous verses folded inside prayer books, some harmless, others less so. You're expected to ignore it all, smile, deflect, play the innocent. If someone admires your beauty, you thank them modestly and redirect the conversation. If someone offers more than words, an invitation to meet in the garden at dusk, for instance, you pretend you didn't hear it. Queens don't entertain such things, not unless they're foolish or desperate, or sometimes just human. Because here's the secret whispered behind closed doors and embroidered veils. Some queens do have affairs. Not many, not often, but it happens quietly, carefully, with the precision usually reserved for smuggling letters or committing fraud. You learn to read the castle not as a home, but as a maze of eyes, of ears, of unlocked doors that might open at just the wrong moment. And if you do find yourself tempted, truly tempted, it's never with the men who leave sonnets on your windowsill. It's usually someone who sees you before the crown, maybe a knight who's watched you fall asleep in the garden with a book, maybe a scholar who talks to you like you have thoughts of your own. Maybe it's no one. But the possibility is always there, quiet and dangerous, like the shadow of a dagger behind a curtain. Historical fact: Queen Isabella of France, wife of Edward II, was accused, though never conclusively proven, of taking a lover, Roger Mortimer. Their supposed affair led to a full-blown rebellion, a deposition, and eventually Edward's murder. Whether it was love, ambition, or survival, we'll never know. What we do know is that once the rumor began, it never died, because in the court's imagination, a queen's desire is never innocent. It's always a threat. The double standard is so blatant it's almost laughable. Your husband can have mistresses openly. He can father illegitimate children who receive titles and lands. His dalliances are shrugged off as masculine indulgences. Yours, real or imagined, are scandals that echo through time. One misplaced glance, and suddenly you're a harlot in the eyes of God and the realm. That's the real danger, not just the act itself, but the accusation. A queen doesn't need to commit adultery to suffer for it. The mere suspicion is enough. That's why every step you take is measured, every laugh weighed, every man within 3 feet of you catalogued. If you speak too kindly to your confessor, you're accused of seducing the church. If you sit too close to your steward, the castle starts buzzing. Even your own letters, if they're too poetic, too personal, can be held against you. You're not even safe from the ink on your own fingers. A fringe example. In some courts, queens were assigned noblewomen as moral chaperones whose actual job was to report back to the king's advisors, not protect you, but monitor you. One such lady reportedly wrote daily notes on her queen's mood, meals, and nighttime visitors, even though the only visitor was a lapdog with arthritis. And yet, in the midst of all this suspicion and surveillance, people still expect you to be charming, warm, engaging. You must dance at feasts, compliment ambassadors, laugh at the jesters' jokes, make everyone feel welcome, but not too welcome, not too warm, not too clever. You must flirt without flirting, dazzle without inviting. It's like trying to balance on a knife's edge while smiling. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how much personal freedom queens really had. Some say the constraints were total, unrelenting chastity, complete isolation, endless scrutiny. Others argue that queens found ways to navigate the system, forming private relationships and quiet rebellions, often under the protection of religion, art, or coded language. The truth, as always, lives somewhere in the shadows. So you master the game. You learn to tilt your head at just the right angle to look friendly but not inviting. You learn to speak in riddles, soft compliments that mean nothing, polite laughter that reveals nothing. You become the queen who is adored, admired, but always slightly out of reach. The ideal, the unattainable, the myth. And yet, late at night, when the halls are quiet and your chamber is thick with the scent of roses and candle wax, you allow yourself to feel it. The loneliness, the weight, the human ache that no amount of protocol can erase. Maybe you lie awake wondering what it would be like to be kissed for no reason at all, to be touched without expectation, to be seen not as a vessel, a symbol, a crown, but as you. But you push the thought away. You remind yourself what's at stake. One moment of carelessness, one secret letter, and your name could become a scandal that spans centuries. You've read about queens who gambled for love and lost their heads. You won't be one of them. You can't afford to be. So instead, you take out a pen and write a poem that no one will ever read. You fold it carefully, slip it into a drawer behind your psalter, and lock it away. Because the heart of a queen is a fortress no one's allowed to breach, not even the queen herself. You never really talk about it, not out loud anyway. But the castle is full of ghosts. Some are the usual kind, the ones you can blame on creaky floorboards or flickering torchlight. But most are quieter, more persistent. They live in your memory, not your hallways. They follow you in the silence between prayers, in the pauses between court laughter, in the stillness that lingers just before dawn. You've buried too much not to be haunted. Your first ghost is small. She would have been 4 by now, with curls like yours and a stubborn mouth. You think about her sometimes when you see the stable boys playing with sticks, chasing geese across the courtyard. She never drew breath outside of you. The priest said it was God's will. The midwife said you'd have more, but none of them stayed up that night, bleeding in candlelight, waiting to hear a cry that never came. You did, and you remember. There are other ghosts too. Sisters who died in childbirth, Friends who fell from favor and vanished, courtiers who smiled at you one morning and were hanged by dusk. The kingdom moves on like it's nothing. The castle walls get scrubbed, the banners get changed, but you remember every name, every silence. And then there's the king, your husband, whose absence sometimes feels more spectral than any death. He's alive, yes, loud, present, physically unmissable when he wants to be. But other times he's a void. You sit beside him at feasts and feel colder than when you kneel alone in the chapel. He speaks across you more than to you. He speaks of you more than with you. And you begin to wonder, is it worse to lose someone to death or to watch them drift while still breathing? Still, you do your duty. You wear black when told. You visit tombs. You fund masses for the dead, light candles, say names with care. But grief is a private thing, too private for a queen. You're allowed to mourn, but only for the right amount of time. Mourn too briefly and you're heartless. Mourn too long and you're suspicious. The court watches everything, especially your tears, especially when they don't come. One of the crueler truths of queenship is this: the people you lose often become tools in other people's games. Your dead child becomes a political weapon, proof that your womb is cursed or that the king needs a new wife. Your dead brother becomes a rallying point for a faction you never agreed with. Your grief is not your own. It is repackaged, repurposed, paraded through court like a trophy. Historical footnote: Anne of Brittany, Queen of France, buried 7 of her children before the age of 37. And still she was expected to smile, to host banquets, to represent fertility and grace as the ideal mother of France. Her public image remained immaculate, even as she walked through life draped in mourning veils. You begin to understand why some queens turn inward, why they retreat to private chapels and cloisters, not because they are devout, not entirely, but because it's the only space left where they can break down. You start slipping away more often, too. You feign headaches, develop a fondness for dusk walks in the herb garden, where no one questions if you cry under the lavender. There's a fringe belief circulating among some court women that ghosts can attach to you if you mourn too fiercely, that every sob you swallow is another thread binding them to your soul. You don't believe it, not really. But you do wonder sometimes, when the hall's too quiet or a breeze moves your curtains at midnight, how many invisible hands trail your steps, how many voices are folded into the hush of your chamber. The dead aren't your only burdens. The living carry weight too. Your children are growing. You see your son with his tutor reciting Latin like he was born for it, too young to know how many people would rather see him fail. You see your daughter adjusting her veil, looking in the mirror like she already knows she'll be married off when it suits the council. They are loved, yes, but also watched, groomed, judged. You'd give anything to keep them innocent longer, but that's not how the game works. There's a scholarly debate around whether queens were allowed to express personal grief freely. Some argue that mourning rituals were elaborate forms of expression: black veils, funeral processions, yearly commemorations. Others suggest these were simply performances, with real emotions stifled behind protocol and politics. In truth, it was both. Mourning was a script, yes, but sometimes the lines became real. You find strange comfort in repetition, lighting the same candle each day, saying the same prayer, touching the same piece of jewelry, a ring from your sister, long gone. These rituals ground you. They remind you that you're still here, still breathing. And sometimes you even find moments of peace. watching your son sleep, hearing your daughter laugh like nothing's ever been broken, watching the sun slide across the stone floors of the chapel while incense curls into the rafters. In those moments, the ghosts fall quiet, but they never leave. You carry them with you, stitched into your hems, folded into your sighs, layered beneath every smile you give at court. You mourn in silence, you grieve in beauty, and you endure, because you're not allowed to fall apart, not in public, not as a queen. It doesn't start with shackles, it starts with silence. One day, your name isn't called at the council meeting. Your usual carriage isn't prepared for the cathedral procession. A letter arrives from the King's Steward 10 on sign telling you that your presence is no longer required at certain affairs of state. It's not exile, not yet, but it's something close. The court doesn't gasp, it doesn't rebel, it just adjusts around your absence like a door slowly closing. You know what this is. You're being sidelined. Perhaps it's a rumor that finally gained traction, a flirtation spun into scandal, a cousin's rebellion blamed on your bloodline. Maybe your last miscarriage disappointed too many people. Maybe your enemies whispered just the right words in the king's ear. Or maybe, simpler still, he's bored. Kings don't need reasons. They only need momentum. And right now, yours is slipping. You're moved to a smaller chamber. Your personal servants are reassigned. Their loyalties questioned behind closed doors. Your jewels, technically crown property, are politely reclaimed for inventory by clerks. The message is clear. You're no longer in favor of the queen in name, yes, but not in presence, not in purpose. Then comes the letter, always a letter, sealed with the king's crest, addressed in someone else's hand. The phrasing is careful. You are invited to take residence at a royal manor for your health and peace of mind. It's not a command, not exactly, but disobey and it will be. You pack what you're allowed, a few gowns, a small chest of books, religious texts, maybe a pet hound if the king is feeling merciful. You kiss your children goodbye in a hallway where no one meets your eyes. Your son clutches your hand longer than he's supposed to. Your daughter doesn't understand what's happening. You lie to both of them because queens lie beautifully. The carriage ride is quiet, too quiet. Guards ride beside you, not unfriendly, but distant, not protectors, watchers. You arrive at your new residence, a stone manor with wide halls and shuttered windows. You're not chained, you're not confined to a cell, but you are not free. This isn't a prison, but it is a cage. Historically, this fate was surprisingly common. Queens who became inconvenient were often sent away, officially for rest, unofficially to remove them from sight. Eleanor of Aquitaine was imprisoned for over 15 years after rebelling against her husband. Catherine of Aragon was forced into isolation when Henry VIII wanted Anne Boleyn. You're in good company. Your daily life shrinks. You wake at dawn, say your prayers, read until your eyes blur. Meals are served by silent hands. The food is plain, respectable. There's always enough, but nothing tastes like anything. No music, no festivals, no court. The silence becomes your second skin. Letters are censored or intercepted. You write to your children, but receive no replies. You write to your sister, and the ink comes back smeared, the seal broken. You start hiding notes in the margins of psalms, slipping prayers between verses. You're not trying to be clever, you're trying to exist. Your ladies, what's left of them, do what they can. One hums songs from court as she brushes your hair. Another brings flowers from the outer gardens and names them as if the act of remembering will bring them back to life. You try to be grateful, but everything feels like it's slipping through your fingers. There's a fringe tale of a queen who carved messages into her chamber wall using a hairpin and candle soot. She wrote names, dates, half-formed prayers. When she died, the wall was whitewashed. History doesn't record what she wrote, only that she wrote something. You think of her when you scratch your name into the wood beneath your writing desk. It's childish, petty, but it's yours. The days stretch long, but the nights are worse. The wind howls like it remembers something you've forgotten. You lie awake wondering if you'll be here forever, if the king will name a new queen, if your son will be taught to forget you, if your daughter will be married off without you there to fix her veil. And worst of all, you begin to wonder if you deserve this, if you were too proud, too clever, too visible, if your silence now is the price for your voice before. There's a scholarly debate over what exile meant for queens. Was it punishment, protection, or political theater? Some say it was mercy, a way to avoid bloodshed. Others call it slow-motion execution, a polite form of erasure. You lean toward the latter. Queens weren't often burned or beheaded, but they could be buried alive. But even here, even in the stillness, you're not broken. Not yet. You begin to write nothing grand, just thoughts, dreams, details of the court you're afraid you'll forget. The way the king twisted his ring when nervous, the scent of the chapel at Advent, the lullaby you sang to your daughter the night before you were sent away. You keep these notes hidden, tucked into bindings, slipped behind bricks, rolled into hollow candlesticks. You don't know who will find them. You only know that someone must. One day, the guards hesitate at your door. Something has changed. A shift in the air. A new messenger arrives. Not a letter this time, but a person. A trusted one. Someone who still says, "Your Grace," with meaning. They kneel. They whisper. And you realize the king is dying, or has died, or is too weak to rule. Suddenly your absence becomes a void that must be filled, and someone, maybe your son, maybe the council, maybe the people, remembers you not as the forgotten queen, but as the one they need now. You return to court under a sky that doesn't look like it remembers you. The banners are the same. The gates still swing on the same creaking hinges, but everything feels slightly off, like you've stepped into a play you once performed, but someone changed all the lines. You are the queen again, technically. The guards bow, the servants curtsy, your name appears on documents, but it's not reverence they show you. It's calculation. They're all wondering what kind of queen you'll be now, after the exile, after the silence, after your fall from grace and slow resurrection, and most importantly, if you've forgiven them. You haven't, but you know better than to say it out loud. Your return is wrapped in ceremony, as though absence is something to celebrate. The priests chant, the bells ring, nobles line up to offer carefully crafted words that all mean the same thing. I'm still here. Please don't ruin me. You smile and pretend it's all fine, that the long months in that cold manor didn't hollow you out, that you're thrilled to be back, that you don't remember who turned their faces away when you were cast out. You do every single one. The hardest part, you're a foreign queen again, all over again. You've returned to a place that never really claimed you, and the language of power has shifted while you were gone. Even your accent, once softened by proximity, feels foreign in your own mouth. Whispers trail behind every step. They think your time away made you weaker, softer, but in truth, it burned away your last illusions. You're not here to please anymore. You're here to endure. Foreign queens have always had it worse, even at the height of your favor. You were a novelty at best, a threat at worst. The court tolerated your customs with polite disinterest, your holidays, your saints, your languages, but they never truly absorbed you. The kitchen staff still mutters about your odd spices. The old women still blame your foreign blood for each unseasonal storm, each sudden illness. You are the queen, yes, but not quite their queen. And now that you're back, that suspicion has grown teeth. There are poems being passed around, crude little rhymes about your exile and return. Some make you a tragic heroine, others a sorceress returned from the grave. You're too clever, they say, too quiet, too foreign. You wear different colors, you speak differently, you make them uneasy, and uneasy people are dangerous. One courtier whispers about witchcraft, another mutters about unnatural patience, because that's the thing. They expect fallen queens to cry, to fade, to wither, but you came back with your spine intact and your smile sharpened. You sit straighter than before. You speak less, but each word lands like a dropped goblet in a silent room. There's a fringe belief still lingering among the common folk, that foreign queens bring bad harvests, that the soil itself can feel your strangeness. A baker leaves out a salt loaf near your carriage, a half gesture meant to cleanse your presence. You step over it without a glance. They want omens? Fine, let them wonder what kind of storm you've brought back with you. And yet, despite all this, some are quietly glad you've returned. They remember the queen who gave alms to the leper colony, who saved a merchant's daughter from an unjust trial, who kept the eastern villages from starving 2 winters ago. Their eyes follow you in the hall. They wait to see if you'll take up the reins again, if you'll speak. But you don't rush, you watch, listen, relearn the rhythm of court life, which is somehow both unchanged and entirely different. A new favorite now stands close to the king's chair, your son, nearly grown suddenly important. You study him. Does he still trust you? Has he been taught to fear you in your absence? And then there are your old rivals, now dressed in deeper colors and sharper jewels. One duchess has taken to quoting scripture in your presence as if your exile somehow made her holier. Another offers you a sapphire pin in memory of better days. You thank her and tuck it into your sleeve, already deciding whether to melt it down or have it blessed by a bishop just to spite her. You resume some of your old duties, hosting visiting noblewomen, managing parts of the queen's household, overseeing charity projects, nothing bold, nothing dangerous. But behind each quiet act is a quiet message. I'm still here. I'm watching. I remember. Scholars argue over the treatment of foreign queens. Some claim the prejudice was cultural misunderstanding. Others say it was deliberate marginalization to keep royal women in check. You don't need to read parchment to know the truth. You lived it. You live it still. The food they serve you is different. The maids speak slower around you as if your ears forgot how to listen. Every gesture reminds you you're not from here, and that means you're never safe here. But in that distance lies power too, because being outside the system means you can see its cracks. You know where the alliances are fragile. You know who talks to whom, who fears exposure, who owes money, who's cheating on whom. You're not welcome, but you are necessary. There's a term the scribes don't use, but you think of it often. queen in exile, not just from the castle, from comfort, from ease, from trust. You've been exiled within your own skin for years now, haven't you? Ever since they crowned you and told you who to be. But this time, you'll write your own lines. You find your psalter, the one from your exile chamber. Tucked inside are the notes you wrote, scraps of your own voice, small truths scribbled in stolen ink. You unfold one now and smile, because you know something the court doesn't. You came back different. You came back dangerous, and you are not finished yet. They say you have a gift knot in public, of course. That would be heresy, but whispered behind tapestries and under breath in candlelit corridors. The servants say you can sense illness before it arrives, that your prayers linger in the air longer than other people's, that your touch calms fevers and your dreams mean something. Some call it blessing, others call it witchcraft. Either way, it's not something you ever asked for. It's just something that clings to you now like the scent of frankincense after Mass. It starts with a charm and amulet pressed into your hand by an old midwife during your third pregnancy. Wear this for protection, she says, eyes sharp with something more than kindness. You don't ask what's inside, you don't have to. The herbs sewn into the silk pouch smell like rosemary and something darker. You hide it under your bodice anyway, because sometimes superstition feels safer than science, and also because you're desperate. After that, more items find their way to you. A ring carved with strange symbols, a bottle of rosewater infused with ash, a length of blue ribbon to ward off the evil eye. You don't seek these things out, they just appear. Gifts from women who've lived longer than expected or who've lost more than they can count. Women who believe in things the church says aren't real. Women who look at you and see not just a queen, but a survivor. It's not that you believe in magic exactly, but you don't not believe. In a world where childbirth kills more queens than swords ever will, where plague can wipe out half a kingdom before sunset, and where a single rumor can poison a reputation overnight, you take whatever protection you can find, even if it smells like burnt sage and fear. Of course, you have to be careful. Too many herbs in your bathwater, and someone will whisper. Too many sleepless nights pacing the chapel, and someone will accuse. A queen is allowed to be pious. A queen is allowed to be wise, but a queen who is too knowing? That's dangerous. There are stories, old ones mostly, about queens accused of witchcraft, not because they practiced it, but because they survived too much. A stillbirth that didn't kill them, a poisoning that didn't work, a husband who died too suddenly. A queen in Bohemia was blamed for a poor harvest simply because she kept bees and read too many books. They took her to a convent and examined her for signs of possession. She never returned. And it's not just the peasants whispering. Sometimes the nobility are worse. A duchess gifts you a crystal and then tells the bishop she saw you scrying in a mirror. A baroness jokes too loudly that your hairpins are actually blessed thorns from some unholy relic. They're testing you, waiting to see if you'll flinch. You don't. You lean into it. You light candles at odd hours. You carry your psalter everywhere, pages stuffed with pressed herbs. You begin wearing deeper colors, blues and purples associated with wisdom, mourning, mystery. You don't correct them when they call you strange. You let the image take shape, because a queen who's feared is far harder to remove than one who's merely pitied. You learn to walk the line. You speak often of saints, especially the obscure ones, those who performed miracles that border on the uncanny. You make offerings to the Virgin, always publicly. You fast twice as often, take communion with lowered eyes, quote scripture with precision. And when someone questions your spiritual devotion, you remind them softly, politely, that no woman can endure what you've endured without the help of God and perhaps a few angels, or something else entirely. There's a fringe practice you've adopted, one kept quietly among the women of court. At night, just before sleep, you trace a small mark on your palm with oil and whisper the name of someone you've lost. It's not official doctrine, it's not even in the Book of Hours, but you learned it from a nursemaid, and she swore it kept dreams from turning to nightmares. Whether it works or not, it gives you peace. And these days, peace is a rare thing. Still, the rumors grow, they always do. The bishop glances at you a little longer during sermons. A friar visiting court pauses mid-homily to remind everyone that even queens may be led astray. A noblewoman's child dies in her sleep, and someone mutters that it happened the same week you wore black gloves. You recognize the signs. You know how quickly things can shift from suspicion to accusation. Scholars often debate how seriously the nobility took accusations of witchcraft. Some say it was mostly a tool used to control, to humiliate, to remove inconvenient women. Others argue that belief was genuine, especially among those who saw the church's authority as fragile. You think both are true. Some people believe it because they need to. Others spread it because it works. You're not planning any spells. You don't keep cauldrons bubbling in the cellar. But you do write things down now. Phrases you like, things you've overheard, symbols that seem to repeat in your dreams. You've started dreaming in symbols lately. Snakes curled around lilies, doors without hinges, a dove bleeding from its beak. You don't know what it means, but you keep a record anyway. And when you speak, you choose your words carefully. You remind the court of your loyalty, of your faith, of your suffering. You make them feel guilty and grateful and slightly afraid, all in the same breath. You host religious scholars. You donate to cathedrals. You commission a chapel window that features St. Margaret, patron of childbirth and difficult women. You're no witch, but you've been treated like one long enough that you've learned how to use the fear. Because if they insist on calling you unnatural, then you'll make sure they never forget how unnatural it would be to cross you. You haven't left the castle walls in weeks, maybe months. Time blurs inside stone and silence, and you lose track of the seasons except for the way the light slants through the chapel windows. So when the proposal arrives, wrapped in gold-threaded parchment and sealed with the archbishop's seal, you barely breathe before saying yes. A pilgrimage, a journey not exile, not banishment, but something holy enough to please your enemies and feel like freedom, at least as close to it as you're allowed. Of course, no one thinks you're doing this for God, not entirely. They say the queen is going on pilgrimage because she's had too many dreams, because she mourns too loudly, prays too long, spends too much time in her private garden muttering psalms beneath her breath. They say she's guilty or cursed, or seeking absolution for sins she's too proud to confess. But they also say it with respect, because a queen who walks the holy road willingly is both revered and feared. Your destination is a sacred site, some remote abbey halfway across the country, known for its miraculous spring and the bones of a saint who may or may not have existed. The details don't matter. What matters is the path, the movement, the procession. Because this isn't a solo journey, pilgrimages are spectacles. From the moment you leave the castle gates, a trail of attendants, horses, guards, scribes, and servants follows in your wake. It's less spiritual journey, more slow-motion parade. The road is mud and ruts and thieving winds. Your carriage jolts over every stone, and your back reminds you of every child you've borne. Still, you peek out the window, inhale the scent of pine and smoke and living earth. For the first time in what feels like forever, you're outside the performance. You're not sitting under a velvet canopy surrounded by backstabbers in velvet cloaks. You're just a woman in motion, trailing prayers and gossip wherever she passes. Villagers gather to watch your caravan pass. Some wave, some kneel, some stare like they expect you to glow. You try to smile, not too warmly, just enough to look divine, not approachable. One little boy throws a flower at your feet. Your horse steps on it. It feels like a metaphor. Along the way, you stop at churches, hostels, abbeys, each place a new audience. Each priest wants a blessing, a donation, a glimpse of your piety. You kneel at relics you don't recognize. You kiss bones encased in gold. You light candles and leave coins. In one chapel, a nun presses a withered hand against your forehead and whispers that you're carrying too many ghosts. You don't argue. Pilgrimage, after all, is as much about repentance as it is about praise. And repentance is a strange thing when you don't know what crime you've committed. You carry guilt like a second skin, but its shape is amorphous. You feel guilty for living when others didn't, for surviving exile, for knowing more than you should, for wanting things you'll never name. There's an old tradition still followed in certain corners of the kingdom where pilgrims carry small stones, one for each sin, and deposit them at holy sites as if unloading the weight of their failings into the soil. You start collecting stones too, not sins, necessarily memories, one for each betrayal, one for each child you lost, one for each time you bit your tongue when you wanted to scream. You don't tell anyone what they're for, you just keep them in a pouch around your neck. And when you sleep, you feel them press against your chest like truths, too heavy to say aloud. A fringe belief among common folk says that if a queen walks the road barefoot, the kingdom's next harvest will be bountiful. You hear it in passing at a market you cloaked, unrecognized, and you laugh quietly. And then the next morning, you leave your carriage before dawn and walk 3 miles in bare feet. You say it's for penance, but you do it because you can, because it hurts, because for once, no one's watching. Pilgrimage also lets you see what the court never will. You see poverty, real poverty. Not the kind they clean up before festivals, but villages starving after late frosts, children with eyes too big for their faces, mothers with hands like twigs. You give what you can, press coins into calloused palms, but you know it's not enough. It never is. Later, when the court demands why your treasury is lighter, you'll blame alms and prayers, and no one will question it. There's a scholarly debate over whether queens used pilgrimage to escape, to gain power, or to perform virtue. The answer is yes to all of it. Pilgrimage was protection. It wrapped you in religious immunity. While you walked the holy road, you were untouchable, spiritually, politically, sometimes even legally. But it was also theater, and you, ever the performer, knew exactly how to shape the narrative. Your arrival at the final shrine is met with trumpets and chants, a welcome so grand it feels absurd. You're ushered into a chapel glowing with candles and incense. You kneel before the bones of a long-dead saint whose name you've said 100 times but never truly known. You close your eyes. You pray not for forgiveness, but for strength. You pray for your children, for your memory, for the version of yourself you used to be before the crown, before the lies, before the endless curtain call that is queenship. You leave your pouch of stones at the foot of the altar not as repentance, but as proof that you were here, that you carried something, that you chose to carry it. You return to the castle different, not just because your feet are blistered and your back is sore, but because you've remembered something important. You are still moving, still capable of motion. You may be watched, controlled, expected, but you are not finished. And from now on, when they say you're pious, they'll be right, just not in the way they think. The garden is yours again, not the royal orchard with its straight rows and noble fruit trees trimmed by servants in liveried coats, but the old walled garden hidden near the back of the queen's apartments, untouched, unfashionable, slightly overgrown. It's where the lavender runs wild, the rosemary escapes its beds, and the bees forget they're meant to be orderly. It isn't grand, but it's quiet. And in your world, silence is as valuable as gold. It was given to you years ago as a gesture of generosity, or perhaps to keep you occupied. A place to reflect, the steward had said with a polite bow that suggested your opinions were growing inconvenient. You remember the first time you walked its narrow paths. You were still new, still learning which flowers were considered appropriate for a queen. White lilies for purity, red roses for love, nothing too wild or too foreign. You followed the rules at first. Now you plant what you like, and you don't ask permission. Every morning you come here alone, or as alone as a queen can ever be. A maid waits just beyond the gate, pretending not to listen. Guards watch from the shadows of the upper walk, but for a few brief minutes you can kneel in the dirt without anyone judging your posture. You can press your fingers into the earth, tug up stubborn weeds, and whisper things into the wind that no one else will ever hear. You begin keeping certain plants no one else understands. Feverfew for headaches, rue for protection, mugwort for dreams, a sprig of vervain tucked behind a sun-warmed stone. The court thinks it's quaint. They call it the Queen's little hobby, with the kind of tone they'd use for embroidery or harmless madness. Let them think it. They don't understand that in this garden, you speak a language older than the court, older than kings one of seeds and scent, of slow-growing truths. Your ladies-in-waiting know better, some of them at least. The wiser ones bring you cuttings from their family lands, seeds smuggled in from distant abbeys. A certain countess sends you saffron bulbs every spring, and though you've never exchanged more than pleasantries in public, you suspect she knows exactly what you're doing. Women have always shared secrets through plants, through the tinctures they brew and the petals they press between pages. A fringe tale reaches your ears. A merchant's daughter once saw you walking through the garden in the rain arms raised, hair loose, lips moving. She swears you were chanting. Her mother swears you made the storm stop. By the time the tale makes it to court, you're half sorceress, half saint. You smile when you hear it because it isn't true, but it could have been. The garden becomes more than refuge. It becomes strategy. You start inviting women to meet you there, not nobles, not loud power players, quiet ones, widows, sisters of fallen knights, daughters with sharp minds and no marriage prospects. They sit with you among the herbs and speak freely in the shade of fig trees no one bothers to prune. You listen. You offer small favors. An intercession here, a letter there, nothing loud, nothing traceable. But over time, the Queen's garden begins to bloom with something other than flowers. You keep a notebook now hidden inside a weathered gardening manual. Each entry is marked not with names but with plants. Thistle for the woman who warned you about the ambassador's betrayal. Marigold for the maid who smuggled your message out of the convent. Bay leaf for the girl who told you where the steward keeps his second set of keys. It's not blackmail, it's gratitude, roots of a different kind. There's a scholarly debate about how queens used domestic spaces to wield influence. Some claim that the queen's chambers and gardens were merely symbolic places of retreat, not power. Others argue these feminine spaces became hidden networks of soft diplomacy and quiet resistance. You know where you stand on the matter. Power doesn't always come with a seal or a sword. Sometimes it smells like time and grows in silence. And then there's the part of the garden no one else enters. Behind a crumbling wall, half concealed by vines, there's a corner you've claimed for yourself. A bench carved with symbols too worn to read. A ring of stones placed just so. Here, you speak to the dead not with ceremony, not with incense, just softly, your lips moving without sound. You tell them what's happened, what you've done, what you still fear. You don't expect answers, but the act of speaking is enough. Sometimes the wind stirs the lavender just as you finish, and you take it as an answer anyway. This space becomes a mirror. You see yourself more clearly here than you ever did in the royal apartments. You're no longer just a crown balanced on exhaustion. You're a woman who has survived war, exile, grief, betrayal, childbirth, and silence. You have been sainted, slandered, and scrubbed down to your barest bones. And yet you are still here. One morning, you find a gift placed on the garden bench. A tiny bouquet of chamomile bound in golden thread. No note, no explanation. But you understand. Someone knows, someone is grateful. Or maybe someone is simply reminding you you're not the only one who watches. You press the flowers between the pages of your psalter. You return to the dirt, the pruning, the planting, and you continue to grow. Your daughter stands before you in a gown too heavy for her age, spine straight, eyes wide, mouth drawn in the same line you've seen in the mirror 1,000 times. She's only 12, maybe 13, but already she's being fitted for a life that's not her own. The court calls it a betrothal, but you know exactly what it is. Another transaction, another girl handed over to seal a deal. This time, the deal is your daughter, and the hand signing it is your own. You didn't want this, of course you didn't. But wanting has nothing to do with it. The match was negotiated months ago, while you were tending roses and pretending not to overhear your son arguing with the chancellor. It's a strong alliance, they said, politically unassailable. His lands are fertile, his coffers full, and his last wife only died of natural causes. You asked what kind of natural causes at 31, and no one answered. So here she is, your daughter, your joy, your shadow standing in the throne room, as nobles smile too tightly and the scribes dip their quills to record the moment. She's being promised to a man twice her age in a country where she doesn't speak the language. And you're expected to smile, you're expected to look proud, and you do, because this is the game, and now she's a piece on the board. She doesn't cry, not once. That breaks your heart more than tears would have. She listens to the terms dowry, titles, land transfers with the same glazed-over eyes you wore at her age. She asks the right questions. When will she leave? Will you visit? Does she have to wear his family's colors? You answer carefully, softly, all while trying not to scream. You remember your own mother explaining marriage to you with the same resigned kindness. "It will be your duty," she said, brushing your hair back like it was something to be proud of. You wonder now if she was proud, or if she sat up the night before your wedding and wept behind the tapestry, just as you do now, hidden from view, while your daughter tries on her new title in the mirror. Later, in your private chambers, she asks you the question you've been dreading. Did you love father? Not do you, did past tense. You think about how to answer about how long it took you to find something like love in the man who treated affection like a privilege to be rationed, about the years of quiet evenings, polite dinners, shared silences that eventually became something soft. Not love, perhaps, but something close enough to pretend. You tell her yes, and for once, it's not entirely a lie. There's a quiet scholarly war about whether royal mothers had any real influence over their daughters' marriages. Some claim queens were nothing more than messengers, forced to smile through negotiations made without them. Others point to records letters, diary fragments, court testimonies that suggest queens lobbied fiercely behind the scenes for better matches, more lenient terms, softer landings. You've done both. You've been silenced, and you've schemed. You've lost battles and won little wars with dowry clauses slipped between the lines. Your daughter's betrothal is, by all courtly standards, a triumph. It secures trade routes, avoids conflict, elevates your family's influence. But to you, it's grief dressed in silk. The court begins preparations. The betrothal feast is planned down to the final candied rose petal. Musicians rehearse. Tapestries are commissioned. A poet writes a flattering ballad that describes your daughter's eyes as starlight captured in ocean glass, which sounds romantic until you remember he used that line for a duchess's hound last winter. You oversee it all with practiced grace. You choose the gown, approve the jewelry, instruct your daughter on how to curtsy without trembling. You teach her how to breathe during the ceremonial blessing so her knees don't buckle. You train her like a soldier because that's what she is now, a noble woman on the front lines of political diplomacy. Her battleground is the bridal chamber. Her armor is etiquette. Her sword is silence. The day of the feast arrives and everything is perfect, because perfection is the only thing left you can control. She looks older in the torchlight radiant, untouchable. You sit beside her and pretend not to hear the whispers about her hips, her womb, her future sons. You nod at the ambassador who will escort her to her new life. You sip wine that tastes like resignation. There's a fringe story from a lesser-known kingdom where queens would secretly mark their daughters' parting dresses with stitched prayers hidden under the hem, sewn in thread soaked in myrrh. You do the same late at night, alone in the sewing chamber, a single line in your native tongue. Come home safe, come home strong. She'll never see it, but that's not the point. The day after the feast, she departs. The courtyard is filled with horses, trunks, guards, and onlookers, pretending this is all perfectly normal. You stand at the top of the stone steps and watch her climb into the carriage, face calm, lips set. She looks up at you once, and it's not a goodbye. It's a promise. You feel your throat close, and your hands tremble beneath your sleeves. She's gone by mid-morning. The palace is quieter now. Her chamber still smells like lavender and parchment. You sit there sometimes, just to remember how her laughter sounded. The court has already moved on to new entertainments, new intrigues. But you sit at your writing desk and begin a letter. You'll write to her every week. Even if the letters are intercepted, delayed, ignored. You'll send little comforts, bits of poetry, pressed flowers, stories from her childhood she doesn't remember. You'll remind her who she is, who you are, what you survived because she will need it, and because the queen who raised her never stopped being her mother. They call it widowhood, but it doesn't feel like release. It feels like a rearrangement, a quiet shuffling of rooms and power and titles. The king is dead. Your husband, ruler, betrayer, occasional companion, father of your children is gone. The court wears black, the priest drones solemn chants, and a nation performs grief with perfect discipline. But for you, it's not just a crown that's shifted, it's the heir. Your first thought when the news came wasn't sorrow. It was stillness, as if something inside you, long wound tight, had finally exhaled. Not relief, not joy, certainly not despair, just space. The kind you haven't felt since you were a girl, walking into court for the first time with your dowry pinned to your chest and no idea what you were giving up. Now they call you the Queen Dowager, which is a polite way of saying you've been retired. You're not Queen Regnant, you're not a ruling widow like Catherine de' Medici or Eleanor of Aquitaine, though you still might be dangerous enough to earn the same suspicion. You're a figure of the past, an honored relic draped in black velvet and expected to fade tastefully into history. But you are not history. You're still here. And that makes people nervous. The first thing they do is move you again, not out of the palace entirely, but into a smaller set of rooms at the edge of the Queen's wing. They're beautiful, of course. Embroidered tapestries, warm hearths, glass-paned windows, but they're not yours. Your seal is revoked. Your household is reassigned. You're given new ladies, new chambermaids, new boundaries. It's like being uncrowned gracefully, politely, with just enough ceremony to make it sting. They also give you a stipend, a generous one, so long as you don't cause problems. You can remain at court, they say, attend feast days, sponsor a nunnery or two, take up embroidery, pray remain visible, but not too visible. Gracious, but not influential. The message is clear. You've had your turn. And yet people still come to you. Noble women with quiet problems, young men with dead mothers, daughters with broken engagements. They knock softly, slip into your chamber under the guise of paying respects, and whisper questions into your fire-lit rooms. Because while you may be retired, your wisdom is not, your memory is not. You have watched this court through 20 winters, and that kind of knowledge doesn't just disappear. You receive letters now with subtle requests from widowed queens in other countries, from abbesses, from merchants' wives, even from ambassadors' secretaries who still believe in your counsel. It's a strange kind of power, this posthumous influence, quiet, informal, but persistent. The younger queen, your daughter-in-law, now nods to you at banquets, respects you, fears you perhaps a little. You made sure of that. There's a historical debate about what power dowager queens actually held. Some claim they were little more than decorative ghosts, elegant symbols of the past with no real authority. Others point to letters, charters, and court decisions that show how widowed queens continued to advise, manipulate, and even rule behind the veil. You're not writing charters anymore, but you're certainly not a ghost. Your wardrobe changes. No more golden embroidery, no more sapphires or peacock blue silks. You wear black, of course, sometimes gray. You veil yourself in mourning lace, and people assume what they see is grief. In truth, it's armor, because mourning in your position is as political as any council vote. If you grieve too little, you're heartless too long, and you're using his death for sympathy. So you craft your sorrow the way you once crafted your smile, deliberate, sung. You write letters to your children with renewed frequency. Your daughter writes back with questions about motherhood and court dynamics in her new home. Your son, now king, sends shorter replies, often dictated, sometimes clipped, always respectful. He trusts you for now. You know that could change. You keep your advice mild, your warnings gentle, but you watch closely. The moment he begins to listen more to his advisors than to his own instincts, you'll be ready. Because widowhood isn't freedom, but it can be opportunity. You begin to fund small projects. Quietly, of course, a chapel restored in the name of a forgotten saint, a small school for noble girls who have no dowry but good minds, a convent for women who refuse marriage, who want to serve but not to breed. You don't boast about these things. You let word spread slowly. Let others take credit if it keeps the work safe. But piece by piece, you start building something of your own, not a kingdom, not a legacy, a sanctuary. There's a fringe rumor about a queen who, after the king's death, gathered a secret circle of women who governed quietly from within a convent library. They wore habits by day, held councils by candlelight, and ensured that every noble house that wronged them lost favor within a generation. You don't believe every part of that story, but you believe enough of it to make it useful. When the court looks at you now, it sees the Queen Mother, the final title, the end of the arc. But you know better. You know the game never ends. Only the pieces change. You've played pawn, consort, exile, queen. Now you become something else. The one who watches, the one who remembers, the one who plants things knowing she may not live to see them bloom. And when the court whispers that you've grown quiet in your grief, you smile because they've mistaken silence for surrender again. They sing about you now, not every day, not everywhere, but enough that your name has left the parchment and entered the firelight. Minstrels pluck their lutes in smoky taverns, and your life becomes rhyme. Sometimes you're a tragic heroine eyes, wet with holy tears. Sometimes you're the scheming widow who whispered kings into war. On good nights, you're a saint wrapped in velvet. On bad nights, you're the witch in the tower, the serpent behind the throne. Either way, you're never just you. The truth has slipped through the cracks as it always does. It doesn't matter how carefully you kept your journals, how many prayers you whispered, how tightly you held your secrets. History isn't shaped by facts. It's shaped by storytellers. And right now, the storytellers have turned their gaze toward your legacy. One bard sings a ballad where you poison your rival with a candied fig. Another tells of a lover you hid in the wine cellar for a decade, his beard growing down to his knees before the king found out. None of it is true, but then again, some of it could have been. You've done enough in your life to blur the line between rumor and possibility. And once that line disappears, people will believe whatever version of you makes the best story. You listen sometimes, not because you enjoy the fictions, but because you're trying to understand what the world wants from you now. If they sing you as a villain, is it because they fear you or because they miss you? If they cast you as a tragic queen, does it soften their guilt for how they watched you suffer and said nothing? There's a comfort in becoming myth. Myths don't have to bleed. They don't age. They don't limp. They don't lie awake at night wondering if they made the right choices. Myths live forever in songs and tapestries, sanitized or scandalized, but always remembered. And that, more than anything, is the one currency left to you now: memory. History likes its women simple: virgin, mother, temptress, witch. You were never simple, and that makes them nervous. So they try to collapse you into one of those tidy roles. They argue about it. Scholars, priests, gossips. They can't decide if you were a force of goodness or a symptom of rot. You walked with saints, yes, but also spoke to midwives who murmured old pagan things. You wore black longer than custom dictated. You received books you weren't supposed to. You kissed your children like they might vanish and ordered noblemen from your chambers like they were footmen. So now, centuries later, they're still trying to pin you down. Did she love her husband? Did she commit treason? Did she practice witchcraft, or was she just clever? Did she mourn, or did she manipulate? You read a letter once, a scholar debating your faith. We cannot be certain of her piety, as her attendance at Mass was frequent but politically convenient, as if the two can't coexist, as if you couldn't love God and still use the altar to send messages, as if women aren't constantly forced to thread their truth through needle holes just to survive. There's a fringe theory that you wrote your own eulogy, that somewhere in the archives is a letter signed only with your initials, describing your life in sharp, unforgiving detail. The names you couldn't speak, the betrayals you never voiced, the dreams you buried under ritual and duty. You wish that were true. You wish you'd had the time or the nerve. But what you did leave behind is subtler. Scraps of yourself in prayer books and council notes, in the margins of diplomatic letters and the spines of herbals passed hand to hand among court women. You know how legacies are built. You helped construct a few yourself. You once arranged a grand funeral for a duchess who died of scandal-hired poets to recast her as a noble matron and made sure her children inherited clean titles. You know how to scrub a name until it gleams. And now they're doing it to you, scrubbing, repainting, reframing, smoothing over your thorns, polishing your silence until it shines like gold. But here's the strange thing. You're still here to see it. You walk through the halls where they now hang your portrait, the one painted years ago when you were at your most decorative. Your expression is serene, your hair arranged just so. You look like someone else. But then you notice the small detail the painter included. A violet ribbon at your wrist, your signal to your daughter on her wedding day, a secret embedded in the brushstroke. You smile, someone remembered. A few younger women curtsy as you pass, not deeply, but with a kind of respect that goes beyond formality. They've heard the songs. They've read the stories. They know you were not simple, and they admire you for it. One even dares to ask your opinion on a marriage negotiation, and you see in her face that same fear you wore once, the knowledge that she is about to be written into someone else's story. You tell her the truth, carefully, quietly, and she listens like it might save her life. So maybe this is what your legacy will be. Not the songs or the painted lies, but the soft thread of truth passed from queen to queen, from woman to woman. Not a monument, but a murmured name. Not a crown, but a caution. And maybe eventually, a kind of reverence not built on perfection, but on endurance. They will get you wrong, that is certain. They already have. But if enough women remember even a fraction of who you really were, the girl in the too heavy gown, the queen in the garden, the mother in mourning, the widow who still watched everything, then maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything. You're old now. Though no one says it to your face, they speak in euphemisms. The Queen Mother is resting. Her Grace no longer attends long council sessions. She prefers quiet these days. But you know what they mean. The court sees you as twilight, a once bright flame now flickering gently in its final hours. They're not entirely wrong. Your joints ache, your sleep is light, you lose names more often than you used to, though never the ones that matter. You spend most of your days in the West Wing, where the sunlight falls just right through the windows and warms the stone like a long-forgotten blessing. The garden is still yours. Your ladies have changed, aged, left, or died, but one or two remain, loyal, familiar. You no longer pretend to oversee anything. There's nothing left to oversee. The new queen has her own court, her own crises, her own favorites. Your son rules with competence, if not brilliance. He visits when he can, and when he does, he speaks gently, as though you might crumble if asked a real question. You don't blame him. You've taught him well enough to recognize a woman who's carrying too many ghosts. You've become something of an artifact. When foreign emissaries arrive, they ask to see you out of courtesy. Their scribes record your appearance. Elegant despite her years, the dowager retains her famed composure as if you were a painting come to life. Sometimes they ask for your blessing. Sometimes they ask if you remember their grandfather. You usually do. You remember more than they expect, and more than they'll ever know. Sometimes you reread the letters you never sent, the ones to your daughter, sealed and hidden in the lining of your traveling chest. You never knew if they'd reach her. You don't know now what you wrote less and less over the years, not out of indifference, but because life overtook her. Marriage, children, survival. You've heard she's strong. You've heard she rules her husband's court with quiet steel. You hope the stitched prayer in her wedding gown still whispers to her in dreams. Your notebooks are tucked into the corner of a shelf behind your psalter, aged and curled with time. Inside them are names, phrases, flowers, warnings. You read them sometimes, half to remember, half to see if they still feel true. One entry dated 2 decades ago simply reads, "Nothing in a queen's life belongs to her except what she hides." You don't remember writing it, but you know it was you. And still, despite your retreat from the stage, the court can't fully let you go. Your name is invoked in council debates. Her Grace would not have allowed this, or the Queen Mother once advised. They argue using your memory, your imagined judgment. You've become a kind of political ghost still haunting decisions you'll never hear about. Part of you resents it, the rest is impressed. Even now they can't agree on what you meant, what you wanted, who you really were. That's power. There's a scholarly argument unfolding in a city you've never seen, in a time you'll never live to witness. Young men in robes debate your life in sunlit halls, turning you into a case study. They write papers on your marriages, your influence, your exile. They question your faith, your foreign customs, your reputation. Some believe you were devout, others think you were a manipulator and a wimple. A few call you proto-feminist, though they don't know your name. You've become history now. The part they'll never get right is this. You didn't survive to become a legend. You became a legend because you survived. In your final days, the air grows softer, the light thicker. The physician visits daily now, though you ask him not to fuss. Your chamber smells of lavender, beeswax, and rosemary, your signature, your comfort, your protection. The maids whisper when you cough. You pretend not to notice. You don't fear death, not anymore. You've seen it too often, walked beside it too long. It's not an enemy. It's a hand you've known was waiting. What you fear is forgetting that your truths will vanish beneath someone else's version of your story. But even that fear fades in time. On your last morning, you wake early. The garden is still blooming. The sky is pale pink as if the heavens are stretching. You walk one final circuit, trailing your fingers over familiar leaves. Your oldest maid follows silently, eyes wet. You smile at her, not because you feel strong, but because that's what queens do. When you return to your chamber, you sit at your desk and open your psalter. Inside it, tucked between the pages of the Book of Judith, is a small folded scrap of parchment. You've written just 6 words in your native tongue, in the handwriting of a woman who once wore a crown and walked through fire. Let them wonder who I was. That night, you slip into sleep without ceremony, without fear, surrounded by silence, herbs, and history. You go not as a queen, not as a villain, not as a martyr, but as yourself. Now the candles have burned low, and the castle lies quiet. The halls echo with fewer footsteps these days, and your name once spoken daily, sharply, reverently, even fearfully, has become something softer, like a thread woven through other people's stories. They don't speak it aloud at council anymore, but it lingers in the spaces between decisions. It flickers in the firelight when someone mentions wisdom or caution, or the quiet strength of women who've known what it is to bleed without witnesses. They've buried you with ceremony draped in the black and violet robes of mourning, laced with gold to remind everyone what you once were. The funeral was as grand as expected. The bells rang, the court wore veils, the archbishop spoke about dignity and devotion, about duty and quiet strength. But what they didn't say, what they'll never say in the open, is how much they still fear you, not your ghost, but your story. Because they can't agree on what it was. There's a statue now somewhere near the chapel garden you once restored. It doesn't look like you, not really. The nose is wrong, the mouth too gentle. But the posture is close, straight-backed, watchful, hands folded just so. Below it, a line carved into stone. Queen, mother, exile, flame. You didn't choose those words, but they're not wrong. Over time, you fade like all queens do, but bits of you remain. A certain herb kept in kitchens long after anyone remembers who first grew it. A story passed from nursemaid to daughter about a queen who walked barefoot for luck. A rule in the palace gardens that lavender must never be trimmed too short. No one remembers why, but they obey it anyway. And the songs, they're still sung, changed now, of course, romanticized, softened. You are the queen of sorrow, of strength, of strange wisdom. Some versions of the tale give you wings. One calls you a star. But you know better. You were a woman. You were a queen. You were never simple.